Before we get into the Season 3 recap of Ted Lasso, if you need a Season 2 recap, just hit the top right-hand corner. It'll take you right to it. I also have a combined Season 1 and 2 recap, so if you've never watched the show before, just want a refresher, you can hit that as well. Season 3 picks up a couple of weeks before the season kicks off. Ted has to drop Henry off at the airport. Henry spent the majority of the summer with Ted, and now he has to go home, and it's got Ted pretty bummed out. He is still talking to Dr. Sharon, and those sessions do make him feel better. But what Dr. Sharon can't do is fix the preseason predictions. Everybody pretty much has the Greyhounds finishing dead last, which really upsets Rebecca. When Ted hears about these predictions, he doesn't really care. They're predictions, they're meaningless. But Rebecca is so focused on them, and mainly about the fact that they're picking West Ham to finish in the top 4. That's really what she's bugged out about. Her finishing last, Rupert finishing top 4, it's just not good for Rebecca's psyche. Rebecca wants to know how exactly they're going to beat Rupert and West Ham, and Leslie brings up, we probably should upgrade our roster a little bit. But Ted doesn't really think that's the issue. He says, I think we'll do just fine this season. But just fine isn't what Rebecca's into. She reminds him that he said that they were going to win the whole thing, and he completely forgot about that proclamation. The meeting with Rebecca has to end because Rebecca has to go have a meeting with Keely. Keely is running her own PR firm. She's a bad bitch, but she's also a single one as well. That's because Roy broke up with her. They had to break the news to Phoebe, and she took it better than Keely did, that's for sure. But to Roy, it was just a matter of their lives were too complicated, too busy. He's focused on being a coach. And he thinks he's developed a pretty good game plan on how best to play this season to not get relegated. When they finally go out to practice, though, for the first day, everyone's pretty distracted. Because the predictions aren't just bothering Rebecca, they're also bothering the team as well. Ted turns to Beard and says, I think we need a road trip. It's like one of those days you want to have class outside, which Roy points out they are outside, but he wants to take the group on a field trip. He tells everybody to file on the bus, and then he takes them to the sewer, which is very amusing to a couple of bystanders who snap photos of the Richmond team literally heading down to the sewers. They're all kind of wondering what they're doing there, and Ted says, me and Henry actually took a tour of this place because he got obsessed with the movie It. But this place was developed because they wanted to keep the crap separate from the streets. Yeah, there's a lot of poop down here, but there's also a lot of poop up there. And right now, all of your brains are London circa 1877. They're blocked up by other people's poop. You need to make an internal sewer system. Get a good flow going. And then connect to a teammate's tunnel. So if you're having a crisis of confidence, you can borrow some of Jamie's. If you're feeling down, maybe Danny can help you out. But if you do this successfully, you can let anything you don't need just flow right through. Like preseason predictions. While this message is great, what Ted is unaware of is the poop up on the streets. Mainly coming from West Ham. Nate has settled in, but he's still the same old self-conscious, timid, insecure Nate that he was at Richmond. One of the first things he does when he comes in is check Twitter to see what they're saying about him. The one person who tries to instill some confidence in him is Rupert. He calls Nate into his office so they can have a good laugh about the preseason predictions, mainly the fact that everyone's picking Richmond to finish last. Nate, though, needs to get ready for his first introductory press conference, one that Rebecca is watching to see what he's going to say. And Nate is terrified. The Wonder Kid is really at a loss for words. He definitely doesn't seem like someone you'd instill a lot of faith in. He realizes that he's bombing this thing, so he ducks under the desk to kind of collect himself. When he pops back up, he has that little fake bravado that he had back in Richmond when he confronted Ted. When a reporter brings up the fact that 2 years ago he was just the guy washing the clothes, he completely claps back at the guy. Another reporter asks what he thinks about Richmond, getting predicted to finish dead last, 20th in the league. To which Nate says, well, they're predicted to finish 20th in the league because there's not a 21st team. Which gets a good chuckle from the room, and Rupert loves it. But man, Rebecca, who's watching it in her office, she's fuming about it. All the reporters' phones start buzzing in the room. And when they look, they see the picture on Twitter that's gone viral of the entire Richmond team heading into the sewer. The one that was taken by the bystanders, it's tweeted out and it's gained some traction. So the press asks Nate what he thinks about this picture. And Nate says, it makes sense to me. I mean, they probably have to train in a sewer because their coach is so shitty. Nate looks over at Rupert when he says that, and Rupert has a big crap-eating grin on his face. And it seems like Rupert has really become a father figure to Nate. Nate just clamoring for his approval. When the Richmond team return to Nelson Road, they see what Nate has said. And at first, a lot of the members of the team are infuriated. And Jamie points out, guys, it's just poop. Let it go. But one person who's not going to let it go is Rebecca. When she finds out Ted has returned, she demands a one-on-one with him. She's infuriated. She feels like Ted has embarrassed her club. He does realize how this could be a pretty bad look. Skipping training, going into a sewer. Yeah, the optics aren't great. She then asks if he's planning on addressing what Nate said about him. And Ted says, no, I'm not. Rebecca can't believe it. She tells him everyone's laughing at us. Rupert is laughing at me, Ted. And I am begging you, Ted. Please, fight back. But that's just not Ted. He goes down to address the media. And the first question the media does ask has nothing to do with Nate, but it has to do with those preseason predictions. Ted just says that they have 38 opportunities to prove those predictions wrong. He then gets a question from the Independent's replacement for Trent Krim, a guy named Marcus Adebayo. Marcus asks Ted if he has any response to what Nate said. And with Rebecca just a few feet away, Ted does the opposite of what she wanted. He says, I thought what Nate said was hilarious. I mean, he came and got us, but hey, that's Nate the Great for you. But he's the same way on the pitch. He'll find the tiniest weakness in a team and he'll attack it. That kid's a junkyard dog, and he's real smart. West Ham's really lucky to have him. I wish Nate nothing but the best of luck. But I guess I am a little surprised that's all he could come up with. I mean, especially against me. I mean, not one joke about me being a dumb American? Come on. He then starts dishing some of that Ted Lasso humor that has the entire room cracking up because it's just so damn corny. And while Rebecca was mad about Ted's response at first, she gets a text from Keely saying, way to let Ted just be Ted. Because instead of firing back at Nate, Ted came out looking great in this situation. And it's something that the Twitter sphere certainly notices, because Twitter's abuzz with the fact that Ted has class and Nate doesn't. And when Nate sees that, he gets pretty downtrodden. It gets even worse for Nate when he gets a text from his mom saying, your dad saw what you said on the television and he's not happy. But one person who is thrilled is Rupert. He loved how Nate handled it, and he wants to gift him something. A brand new car for his Wonder Kid. So that should make Nate feel a little bit better. Ted wasn't gifted anything by his owner. He just headed home to FaceTime Henry, and he showed Henry the modifications that he made to Henry's Lego stadium that he was building over the summer. One question Henry has is, why do you have Nate off to the side? And Ted says, well, you know that. It's because Nate's not on the team anymore. And Henry says, yeah, but you can still be friends, right? And Ted says, yeah, buddy, you're right. We can still be friends. Ted, though, has been dealing with a little bit of an internal crisis. He's starting to wonder why he's still in London. He misses Henry. Henry spent a lot of time with him. He didn't want to see him go. And it's Henry who reminds him, Dad, you're there to win the whole thing. Henry then shows Ted his new toy. It's a Thanos Infinity Gauntlet. And when Ted asks, who gave that to you? Henry says, oh, Jake, Mommy's new friend. And now Ted has that headache to deal with. In episode 2, when Ted shows up at the office that day, he's surprised because not only is he greeted by the normal Leslie and also Rebecca, but Keely's there. That's a pleasant surprise. And Trent Krim. Trent has approached everybody about the idea of following the team around for a book. While they told Trent that it's ultimately Ted's choice, it's pretty clear that no one thinks it's a good idea. They kind of all give Ted a look like, please God, don't say yes. And he says yes. Shortly after welcoming Trent, big news hits the soccer world as a guy named Zava is now a free agent. He's leaving Juventus. Zava is a bit of a diva. The guy's been on 14 teams in 15 years. He's also extremely expensive, but he's the kind of game changer that every club should be looking for. And Rebecca doesn't really seem interested in dealing with that drama until she finds out that Rupert and West Ham will absolutely be interested. When she hears that, she is all for getting Zlatan. Sorry about that, getting Zava. And the fact that Rebecca now wants Zava because Rupert wants him is something that Trent Krim really respects. Once they leave Rebecca's office, Ted is able to speak to Keely about her new business venture. And Keely tells him that it's going well, but she's having problems integrating herself to her new coworkers. Everybody seems super stiff. Barbara in particular. Ted suggests that she finds something to do with these people outside of work, and she thinks that's a great idea. As she's trying to leave, she runs into Isaac, who wants a shoe deal, and then she runs into Jamie. The two quickly get caught up, and then Keely makes her way over to Roy, who's got some things from his place that he needs to give her. As this conversation is happening out of earshot, Isaac notices the two must have broken up. Body language is there. And the fact that Roy and Keely broke up definitely piques the interest of Jamie, who still has never given up hope that maybe he and Keely can one day rekindle their relationship. But first, Jamie needs to confirm that Roy and Keely broke up, so he pulls Roy into an office and says, "Did you guys break up? Is it true?" And Roy confirms it, but what really comes as a surprise is the fact that he was the one who initiated the end of the relationship. He wasn't dumped. He was the dumper. He also really doesn't want to talk about it. While Roy and Jamie were having this conversation, over in Ted's office, he was discussing Zava with Coach Beard. And Coach Beard thinks it's a no-brainer to get him. But then they hear a commotion out in the locker room. When they go to check on it, Sam says, "We just heard the most upsetting rumor." And Ted says, "Is this about us getting Zava?" And that's not upsetting at all. That excites everybody in the room. Ted restores order by saying, "Okay, if you weren't talking about Zava, is this about Trent Krim writing a book?" And they had no idea about that. The rumor that they found upsetting was the fact that Roy broke up with Keely. Everybody liked that relationship. Even Ted is completely shocked by this. Shortly after Ted almost faints from hearing the news, Roy walks in and he immediately blames Jamie because he thinks that Jamie told everybody. But Jamie said, "No, I didn't tell a soul. I just came in and they were talking about us getting Zava." And that distracts Roy completely, who is all for the team going and getting Zava, even though he's crazy. Ted then tries to get the conversation of why the relationship ended, but Trent walks in with Leslie and Roy shuts down. He's not willing to discuss anything in front of Trent. And he tells the entire team, "No one says a word around this guy unless you want my forehead through your skull." And at that threat, everybody quiets up around Trent. The other side of this breakup, though, Keely headed off to a music video for one of her clients, where she gets rekindled with one of her good friends, Shandy. They get caught up pretty quickly, but then Shandy gives a suggestion to the director of the music video that they're working on, and it's a really good suggestion. Keely loves Shandy, and it's a good suggestion. She decides, you know what, you should come work for KJPR. The problem comes when Barbara, her CFO, finds out about this hiring. She's very dismissive of the fact that Shandy has no experience whatsoever, and she feels like Keely is simply hiring her because they're friends. And Keely does not like the way that Barbara treated Shandy. So she goes and confronts her about it, saying that it's completely inexcusable. She gets distracted, though, when she sees the snow globe collection that Barbara has. And Barbara mentions that she gets a snow globe from every place she's ever worked. And she's worked at a lot of different places. Probably because her attitude sucks. Keely then gets back on track, telling Barbara that she cannot speak to people in a dismissive tone just because she feels like they're not qualified. She's not rude about it. She just wants to hammer home the point that at KJPR, Barbara needs to treat people with respect. And Barbara does that by coming up with an official title for Shandy. While that work relationship was getting mended, the work relationship between Trent Krim, who's just trying to write a book, and Roy is still on the rocks. Trent is actually put in an office with Roy, but Roy is very disruptive and still has no interest whatsoever of talking to him about anything, and he has no interest in squashing whatever beef the two have with each other. And it's really just one-sided beef, because Trent has no problem with Roy, but Roy clearly has a problem with Trent. But since Roy put that edict to the team, they've heeded it. No one talks around Trent Krim, making his work nearly impossible to complete. As for the actual Richmond team, they're preparing for their season opener against Chelsea. And Rebecca gets great news. Zava is planning to sign with Chelsea. It's great news because he has flat out said, "I'm not signing with West Ham, I'm signing with Chelsea." And that's all that Rebecca really cares about. While she would like to have Zava as a Greyhound, ultimately, her main goal is to just make sure Rupert doesn't get him. So she heads to Chelsea's pitch in a great mood. She's in an owner's box. She's hanging out with Keely. This game's also sort of homecoming for Roy Kent, who played years for Chelsea and is beloved by the fan base. And this is the first time he's coming back to the pitch. He's greeted with a huge ovation. But the guy who gets the biggest ovation is Zava, who shows up and is watching it from a suite. It's distracting not only to the fans, but to the players as well, because the Richmond team still thinks that they have a shot of getting them. And maybe it's the Zava distraction that leads to the Greyhounds losing 1-0 at the half. Halftime is where things start to go south. Rebecca looks to her right and sees Rupert talking to Zava, and that's when she starts to panic, because she knows how convincing Rupert can be. She remembers being wooed by him back when she was just a bartender. She knows that if Rupert really wants Zava and is able to get him one-on-one, like he currently has him, there's a pretty good chance that Zava changes his mind. She's not ready to just let Rupert take this guy from her, so she gets up from her seat and tries to make her way to his suite. But she gets stopped by security, and that's when she sees Rupert, who forgot something in the suite. They start trading the most subtle, petty insults, and it's Rupert's who hurt the most. She also gets shut down by Zava. When he walks out of the suite, she introduces himself, but he flat out says, "Yeah, I'm not signing with you guys." But Rebecca still isn't willing to give up and let Rupert win. She follows Zava into the bathroom, and as this guy is taking a piss, she reams him out, saying that he's being a little bitch. Signing with West Ham, that's easy, but he's clearly not as good as he thinks he is, because if he was, he would sign with Richmond and cement a legacy. She insults him, she calls him overrated, a chicken, and then just has a mic drop and walks out, leaving Zava with a lot to think about, because nobody comes at Zava's ego like that. And while Rebecca was insulting the number one free agent, Ted was trying to motivate his guys, but that's really hard to do because every time Trent Krim enters the locker room, everybody gets quiet, and Ted can't work like this. He pulls Roy aside and gets real serious with him, telling him, "I don't know what your beef is with Trent, but I'm going to need you to squash it right now, because your ego is about to sabotage a whole lot more than a stupid football match." So Roy calls Trent into the showers where they can speak privately, and he pulls out an old newspaper article from years ago. It's from when Roy made his Premier League debut, when he was just 17 years old. And Trent Krim wrote that he was overrated, overhyped, and already a disappointment. And it hurt Roy to the core. It ate at him so much that he kept that article in his wallet for years. He never forgave Trent for the nasty words that he said after this kid just had his dream come true, only to be dashed by some stupid journalist. And Trent owns up to it, saying, "Look, I was young in my career and I was trying to make a name for myself by being edgy." He apologized to Roy. The two squashed the beef, and when they walk out of the room, Roy announced to the entire team, "Okay, you can talk around him now," and they start strategizing about how they're going to beat Chelsea. They end up going out in the second half and tying, leaving Chelsea with a point. But Chelsea doesn't care, because after the match, they're hosting a press conference where they're hoping to announce the newest signing, Zava. Although Zava shocks the entire football world by announcing that he is not signing with Chelsea, he has changed his mind, and he is now signing with Richmond. Everybody in the Richmond locker room is thrilled about the news. They're more excited about this than actually tying the match. As they're leaving, though, Ted, Roy, and Trent all have a conversation about what it was like for Roy to be back at Chelsea. And while you would think that it would be great to get an ovation like that, it was sad for him, because he remembers his last match with Chelsea. He remembers what it felt like to know at that moment he no longer had it. He didn't want to be one of those broken down players just taking up space because of legendary status. So going back there today, there's a slight part of him that wonders maybe he should have stayed and enjoyed himself. But he tells Ted, "That's just not who I am." And Ted says, "Well, not yet. I mean, think of the bright side. If you didn't leave Chelsea when you did, we never would have met." And that does elicit a bit of a smile from Roy. In episode 3, Ted and the group are excited to introduce Zava to the world. They have a noon press conference scheduled, and beforehand, they start talking about what they're going to do with Zava in the lineup. Someone's going to have to come out, and it's going to be Colin. But the exciting thing about having Zava on your team is that he can pretty much play anywhere. It doesn't matter. And the coaches aren't the only ones who are excited. So are Zava's teammates. Everybody except Jamie. Jamie doesn't seem to understand the big deal about having Zava on Richmond. Although it does seem like it's more of a jealous thing than an overrated thing. Everybody, though, has to head out to the pitch for the introductory press conference, and it's packed with media members, with fans. But the one person who's missing is Zava. No one knows where he is. Rebecca, Higgins, Keely, they all start trying to do damage control and figure out, one, if the contract is signed, which it is, and two, what they're going to do if they can't find this guy. They can't have people just waiting around. On top of it, Zava being late is screwing up Rebecca's plans. She has a meeting with a fortune teller who her mother suggested she try out. And while Rebecca thinks it's ridiculous, she's going to do it anyway. After a little while, the stress of Zava not showing up is really getting to Rebecca, so she pulls Ted and Keely upstairs to figure out what they're going to do next, while she sends Leslie out to be a sacrificial lamb in front of the crowd. When they get up to Rebecca's office, they're surprised, though, because Zava is sitting there in her chair. She kicks him out of her chair and then introduces him to Ted for the first time. And Zava's a different dude, but he is excited to meet Ted, and he seems to be open to being coached. He's also winning over just about everybody, including Keely. But Keely isn't the only one who is amazed by the sheer presence of Zava. So are his teammates when he finally makes his way down to the locker room. They are all stunned to be finally in the presence of the great Zava. He makes a speech to the group addressing the most important person in the room, Will, the equipment manager, because he used to be a ball boy. He appreciates what people behind the scenes do. He then does a weird breathing exercise in order to bond with his teammates. As I said, very different dude, very eccentric. But nobody other than Jamie really questions any of it. They're just excited to have somebody with this much talent on their team. With Zava getting integrated to his teammates, it allows Rebecca to run out and meet up with her mother's psychic. The two women sit down and they do a weird exercise with a bowl, and the woman starts getting a vision of a green matchbook in Rebecca's hand, and she claims that it's very special to her. She then hears somebody speaking to her about a shite in Nining armor. You heard that correctly. At this point, Rebecca thinks that this woman is nuts, it's a waste of her time. She gets up to leave, and that's when the psychic tells her, you're going to have a family. You're going to be a mother. And at that prediction, Rebecca actually curses the woman out. Back over with her club, Keely is doing a PR campaign about the arrival of Zava. She's interviewing some of the players about their feelings on it. Everybody's positive. And Roy walks in and says, Keely, if you need an interview, I'll do it for you. And this is a big deal because Roy doesn't do interviews. And Shandy steps up and says, well, yeah, I'll interview you. Why did you dump my friend? And because of her brashness, Roy knows exactly who Shandy is. He remembers Keely talking about her. Roy walks out because he's not about to waste his time with Shandy of all people. Roy walks back into his office and he interrupts a conversation between Jamie, Beard, and Ted. Jamie's a little concerned because he knows about players like Zava. They're all about themselves, he says. And this comes as a real surprise to Roy and everybody else because the irony of Jamie Tart talking about a selfish player is not lost on anyone in the room. Beard says as much, and Ted just tells Jamie, look, man, we're going to give it a couple games and see how it goes. The next day is Zava's AFC Richmond debut, and the message is clear from Roy and the rest of the coaches, get the ball to Zava. Right before they head out to the pitch, though, Ted remembers that Henry has a big game that day, and he wants to call him up and wish him good luck. He can't find his cell phone, so he picks up his office phone, and he realizes he doesn't remember Michelle's phone number. He's pretty surprised at himself, but he decides to just call the house, and that's when another guy answers the phone. The guy on the other end is doing a pretty decent Donald Trump impression, and Ted, as per usual, plays along with it, but the guy gets really uncomfortable because he knows Ted. His name is Jacob Bryanson, and he was actually Ted and Michelle's marriage counselor. It's extremely uncomfortable for Dr. Jacob, and it's also pretty surprising to Ted. Ultimately, Ted is able to wish Henry good luck, but he's pretty shell-shocked at this. He has to switch modes, though, from being shocked that the guy who was supposed to save his marriage is now tucking his wife in goodnight from 4,000 miles away to actually coaching a match. Not to worry, with the addition of Zava, AFC Richmond go out and win. And the next week, they win. And the week after that, and they win, and suddenly, they're pretty close to the top of the table, right there with West Ham. The addition of Zava has really paid off for them in the standings. But even though he's having career success, the Dr. Jacob thing is really eating at Ted. When he's not at the pitch and he's not working, it's all he can really think about. This dude giving Henry high fives after he scores. This dude giving his wife high fives after they score on each other. It's just awkward. He does talk to Dr. Sharon about it, but that's only going so far. But if you didn't know any better, you'd think everything was going great, because everything is going great for Richmond. After 6 games, the team is 5-1. They're the Cinderella team of the year, and they're crushing it. So much so that after the latest win, Sam invites the entire team to a soft opening of his restaurant. The entire team does show up that night. Everybody's having a good time, and that includes Colin, who lost his starting job to Zava, but hey, he's cool with it because it's with Zava. He even invited a friend. He introduces Michael as just his mate to all of his teammates, but Michael is a lot more than that because Colin has been hiding a secret, and that's the fact that he's gay. Michael isn't just his mate, it's his boyfriend. But Michael knows to play the part. So when he meets all of Colin's teammates, he just says, yeah, I'm the best wingman in the world. The only person at this party who doesn't seem to be having a good time is Jamie. While Zava is scoring on the pitch nonstop, Jamie is in a bit of a slump. The addition of Zava has taken the shine away from him quite a bit, but he also isn't getting the ball as much, which means he's pressing. When he does get the ball, he kicks it way over the net. So while everyone's enjoying the food and the ambiance, Jamie can't help but think that he's become a weak link. It also doesn't help the fact that he's not getting the ball. Roy notices Jamie sulking in the corner, so he decides to walk up to him and say, dude, what is going on with you? We're on a 5-game win streak. Why aren't you happy? And Roy gets his answer when Zava walks in the room, and Jamie kind of scoffs at it. Roy looks at Jamie and says, he's the best player on the team. You used to be, but now you're not. And you still could be the best if you weren't such a prima donna. Jamie tells Roy, I want to be better than him. And Roy says, I could train you. And Jamie says, yeah, I want this. So the training starts right then and there. Roy ain't letting Jamie eat any of this food, no matter how delicious it is. Sam, though, didn't invite just the team to this party. He also invited the front office, and that includes his former fling, Rebecca. While she's having a good time hanging out with Keely, what she heard earlier the day from that psychic is still sitting with her. She's been trying to make sense of all of it all day, and she just can't. That is until Sam starts handing out some party favors, and they're matchbooks for his restaurant. Green matchbooks. He hands them out to everybody, including Trent Krim, who takes one before he leaves and starts to walk home. And he looks down an alley not too far away from the restaurant, and he notices that Colin is hooking up with Michael. And it's hard to tell whether he'll include that in the book or not. In episode 4, Roy was definitely not lying. While he started training the previous night, he also continues it early in the morning when he wakes up Jamie for a run. Ted had a little bit better of a wake-up. He woke up with Sassy after the two had a nightcap, but as she's leaving, Ted asks her out on an actual date, and she says no. When Ted asks why, she says, Ted, you're a mess. She's just simply more comfortable with the current arrangement, friends with benefits. Ted then has to get ready for work because it's a big week. They're playing West Ham, something that is consuming Rebecca's mind. She heads to KJPR to vent to Keely about the nice things that Rupert said about Richmond in the press. And while Keely is being a good friend and being supportive, she also has a business to run, and she's sending Shandy over to the pitch because Shandy is doing a new campaign for Banter. The man that you could be talking to on Banter might be a professional football player. It's going to involve all the single players, and when Rebecca hears that, she mentions all of them, but really focuses on Sam being single. She finds out, though, that Sam isn't on Banter anymore. Not that Rebecca cares about that sort of thing. Shandy heads out, and then Barbara comes in because she's looking for 2 tickets to the game on Saturday. Their big investor, Jack Danvers, is coming into town. Keely's so oblivious that she doesn't even know this guy's name, but she's willing to get him tickets. Rebecca takes care of that. Back over at the facility, the boys are trying to figure out how they're going to beat West Ham, and there's definitely some concern in the room that they just can't do it. When Ted finally interrupts, he gets the conversation on a more important matter. The fact that Sassy said that he was a mess. It ends up resulting in a meeting of the Diamond Dogs. Initially, Roy doesn't want to be in it, but he gets into it because Beard says, this has nothing to do with Sassy. This has to do with Nate. You're acting like everything's normal, like he didn't hurt you, but he did hurt you. Ted tries to tell him, look, this has nothing to do with Nate. I'm asking you if I'm a mess. And Higgins says, I just don't understand. I don't understand how you're not mad at Nate. No matter how much Ted doesn't want to talk about the issue, it's become clear that this is going to be the main topic of the Diamond Dogs meeting. The fact that Ted continues to act like Nate's actions didn't affect him at all. Roy jumps in when Ted says, "Nate didn't hurt me." Roy yells, "That's bullshit." While they were having this meeting, though, outside in the locker room, the players were discussing how they need to ignore the talking heads of the media. Zava especially says these people don't know what they're talking about. And Jamie agrees with him, saying, yeah, we just have to focus on what we need to do. Isaac gets up in support and says, yeah, you guys are right. And he goes to slap the Believe sign, only to reveal that the Believe sign has been torn in half. Up until this point, the players had no idea, and now they're wondering who the hell did it. Trent Krim, who watched this entire interaction, decides to go searching for some answers. Meanwhile, the guy who actually did tear the sign, Nate, is trying to turn his newfound celebrity status into a date. He goes to that restaurant that he tried to get a reservation at last year and kind of got turned down, but eventually turned it into a reservation. Yeah, he heads there. He kind of tries to hit on the hostess, but she doesn't really seem to care about him or his celebrity status or any of that. The owner knows who he is, and he comps the meal, but Nate still walks out of that place single. Nate heads back to the office, but he's not worried about Saturday's game. What he's really worried about is this is the first time he's going to see Ted since the whole blow-up. He tells Rupert that he feels like he owes Ted a little bit of an apology, but Rupert says no. You did what was best for you. What were you supposed to do? Hang around and support Ted for the rest of your life? You've done nothing wrong. You've earned this job. Nate asks Rupert, what am I supposed to say when I see him? And Rupert says you shake his hand, you say hello, you look him in the eye, and then you go out and beat him. Nate really, really appreciates this talk. Back at his former club, they're finding out, though, what Nate did. Trent Krim might have been a reporter, but now he's an investigative journalist who found the security camera footage. He calls Ted, Roy, Beard into a room and shows them that it was Nate who was the one who tore the sign down. Beard and Roy want to show the video to the team. They feel like it could motivate them, really fire them up. But Ted doesn't want to do that at all. He just tells them to go home. He's not going to use that tactic. For the team, it's ignorance is bliss. They've started Keely and Shandy's banter campaign. It includes Jamie, who Shandy seems to like quite a bit, and who Keely doesn't seem to be over. She starts talking about how Jamie used to be all about himself, but recently he's changed. And as she's talking, she's realizing what she's saying. Because up until this point, she knew it, but she had to say it out loud for her to actually realize it. Shandy, though, doesn't care about any of that. She just wants to know if it's okay if she tries to sleep with him. And Keely plays it off like it's okay. The next day is match day. Keely and Rebecca show up because they're going to be watching the game together, and Keely's really nervous because she's going to meet Jack for the first time. She wants to impress him. She heads into the bathroom, though, before she heads to the suite, and she realizes that it's that time of the month. Lucky for her, there's somebody in the stall next to her, so she decides to ask her, hey, do you have a tampon? And she starts making some comments that probably are a little too forward, a little too brash. She doesn't really think anything of it, though, until she gets out of the bathroom and meets Jack. And Jack isn't a guy, it's a woman. And Jack was the one who gave her the tampon in the bathroom. It's kind of embarrassing for Keely. Jack, though, seems to handle it well. She understands because, she's been through that kind of thing before. Doesn't really think anything of it. She just kind of wants to enjoy the game. But most of this game is going to be centered around the coaching battle between Ted and Nate. It's also going to be the first time these two see each other, and it's going to be a little bit awkward, especially for Nate. Even after Rupert's pep talk, when Ted gets in the same elevator as Nate, he tries to hide in the back and not be seen, but Ted sees him. Ted acts like nothing went down between the two, like he's excited to see Nate, and it seems like Nate gets pretty close to apologizing, but when the elevator doors open and Rupert's standing there, he can't bring himself to do it. They then have to get ready for the actual game. Even though they seem to have a pretty good interaction in the elevator, when Nate and Ted go out to the pitch, Ted walks up to Nate and shakes his hand and says, hey man, let's have fun out there. But Nate just gives him daggers. And Nate isn't the only one. So are Beard and Roy because they know what Nate did at this point. Unfortunately, though, it doesn't go down like that after one half. Jamie's form is still pretty poor. He misses a pretty easy goal, but they are getting good goaltending from their new goalie, Van Dam. He got the confidence from Zava to change up his name from Zorro to Van Dam because he likes Jean-Claude Van Damme. And it seems to be working until West Ham score. And then right before halftime, thanks to Nate the Great's tactical genius, they score again, and it's 2-0. Ted goes in to talk to the team, but he sees Rebecca, so he puts that on hold to go see what's up with her. And she's freaking out a little bit. This one really meant a lot to her. She doesn't want to lose it. So she tells Ted, I just want to tell you I believe in you, and I know I've been putting a lot of undue pressure on you, but forget all of that. Be yourself and have fun. Although she's not overly convincing with any of that. When Ted walks back into the locker room, the team is fired up. And that is because while Ted was out in the hallway talking to Rebecca, Beard and Roy decided to show them the video of Nate tearing up the sign. The Richmond team walk out of the tunnel for the second half, and they are ready to kill. All of them shooting death stares at Nate. But it actually works against them. They get yellow cards that turn into red cards. They play completely undisciplined, and they end up losing 4-1. At the end of the match, Ted goes to shake Nate's hand, but he just runs onto the pitch, completely blowing off his old boss. It also didn't go much better in the stands. Jack is really tough to read for Keely, but it didn't seem like she had that good of a time. She also overhears a conversation between Shandy and Keely when Shandy proudly announces that banter is trending, but it's not for a good reason. Shandy, without the consulting of Keely, decided to change one of the lines in the banter ad to say, want to hook up with a rich celebrity, although she didn't use the word hookup. This is a really embarrassing moment for Keely because it looks like she doesn't have control of her company. She pulls Shandy aside and says, you need to change this right away. This is not acceptable. But Shandy pushes back, saying, banter's going to love this. I've tripled their subscribers in an hour. Keely, though, reiterates, you need to change it back. And Shandy reluctantly agrees. As for Rebecca, she's milling about the suite level when she sees that Rupert hasn't changed his ways at all. He's sneaking off with his secretary. When she eventually does go to leave and she's going to get her car, she ends up running into Rupert and Bex. They're cordial, but Rebecca whispers into his ear, I saw you with your assistant. Your daughter deserves better, and so does Bex. Stop messing around. Down in the locker rooms, it's pretty catatonic after the match for Richmond. Beard and Roy just want to get yelled at by Ted, but he doesn't give them that. He just tells them to shake it off. There's a lot of football left. And they hate that. They'd rather be yelled at. In the other locker room, things are great. Nate tells the media that it was easier than he thought it would be. But they did notice that he snubbed Ted in the handshake. And they ask about it, and Nate didn't even realize he did it. He just tells them that he got caught up with the excitement. He is getting rewarded, though, for this big win. Nate does see Ted near the bus, and he's about to walk up to him and shake his hand, apologize, just talk to him, but Rupert's assistant comes down and says, Mr. Shelley, Mr. Mannion wants to meet you here in an hour, and it's a VIP pass for a club in London. When Nate shows up at that club an hour later, Rupert has a couple of ladies waiting for him, and they look a lot better than the hostess from that restaurant. Later that night, the losing coach, Ted Lasso, is not even thinking about the game. He's thinking about what's going on at home. He FaceTimes Michelle, and he tells her how he feels about the whole situation. He tells her that this whole situation pisses him off, and he's upset that they didn't get to talk about it earlier. He apologizes for saying it, but he also adds in, I'd feel bad if I didn't say it, because we have to raise this little boy together. They then say goodnight to each other, and in episode 5, it is a month after the team lost to Nate in West Ham, and their form has gotten worse and worse. They are on an unbelievable skid. Everyone's pretty pissed off, and everybody thinks they have their reasons on why the team's playing so badly, except Ted. He doesn't seem all that mad about it. He just figures it's a bad stretch and they'll fix it. But Rebecca is furious. She storms into the coach's office right after the latest game and says, are we ever going to win again? It's an attitude that Ted hasn't really seen much, so he gets a little concerned, honestly, and he tells her, yeah, we're actually talking about it right now, about some strategies. We'll fix this thing. Once she leaves the office, she heads to go grab some coffee by herself, and she ends up running into her ex-boyfriend, John. He's doing quite well. Actually, he's engaged, and he thanks Rebecca because if she never broke things off with him, he never would have met his fiancée. His fiancée, of course, agrees with this, thanking Rebecca as well, and says that John is her shite in nining armor. And that freaks Rebecca out because that is what the medium said. It didn't make sense at the time, and now Rebecca hearing it, it's as if everything is coming true. First the green matchbook, and now this. So it really changes her mood up. For the rest of the day, it's all she can focus on. But back over with the team, they're pretty confused as well. It has nothing to do with shite and knighting armor. It has to do with how Nate ended up getting the model Anastasia. The guys don't know that Rupert set up that date. But that date has ended up making the tabloids. So it's circulating that Nate and Anastasia are currently dating. In reality, they only met that one time. It's not much. And in fact, Nate didn't even ask for her number. Rupert's assistant walks into Nate's office and gives it to him, saying, "My friend was pretty surprised you didn't ask for this, so you might want to call her." And Nate does that, and they do, in fact, set up a date. Nate takes Anastasia to that restaurant, the same one with the hostess that he's been crushing on. He feels like it might impress her, make her jealous a little bit. But Nate's actual date, Anastasia, is not impressed at all. In fact, she finds the place pretty drab and dreary. Nate explains to her why that restaurant means so much to him, but she just doesn't care, and she uses an excuse to get out of there. Nate has to watch as Anastasia hops in a convertible with the rest of her model friends as "Wake Me Up Before You Go" blasts in the background. Apparently, it wasn't just something from Zoolander. Models really do this. But it leaves Nate in the restaurant all by himself. Jade, the hostess that Nate's been crushing on, comes over with the baklava that he ordered, and he mentions how he can't eat it alone. So she actually sits down, and the two finally have a conversation. And it seems like it goes pretty well. So this night that looked like a disaster for Nate ends up turning around pretty quickly because the girl that he actually wants to date finally seems interested in him. Back with Nate's former boss, Ted, he, along with Beard and Roy, are trying to figure out how they're actually going to get back in the win column. They're going through tactics, and even Trent Krim chimes in with a tactic, but he thinks that won't work. The problem, ironically, is Zava. The guys are just kind of stuck watching him do everything. While it worked in the beginning, it's no longer working, and they're concerned. But Ted really gets concerned when he sees a message from Michelle telling him that Henry had a bullying incident at school. Michelle just kind of wanted to keep him updated on what's going on. But this really throws Ted for a bit. He feels like if he were at home in Kansas, it never would have happened. So he's going to try to set up a time to talk to Henry one-on-one about the situation. The next day, things don't get better for Ted. He doesn't know it, though, but Leslie goes up to the office and tells Rebecca, "I think we need to consider letting him go." And it doesn't bring Leslie any joy to do this. In fact, he putters through trying to say it. He hates the idea of letting Ted go. And Rebecca hates it as well. She feels like the club will eventually get back in the win column. But Leslie just mentions the fact that, hey, if we continue down this road, it is something we need to consider. And it's the first time since Ted has shown up and Rebecca's actually got to know him that letting Ted Lasso go has even been brought up in conversation. Rebecca isn't really thinking, though, about firing Ted. She just can't shake what this medium said. And the fact that things are happening is troubling her even more. So she heads to the doctor to find out if it's even possible that she can have children. And when she sits down with him, he says, "Yes, actually, it's very possible. I treat women like you all the time. But just to be sure, we'll run some tests and make sure that you can, in fact, have kids." So Rebecca goes through the battery of tests, and she's hoping to get the updates the next day. Back with the club, they're a little frazzled too. It has nothing to do with mediums. It has to do with their poor play. And the fact that they're playing the best team in the league next, Man City. It seems like a foregone conclusion that they're going to lose this one. And even Sam's usual positivity isn't working on the club. Jamie actually has to stand up and say, "Guys, we're good too. We're in a bit of a rut, but stop acting like we're not talented and we can't hang with that club because we can." And Zava stands up after Jamie and agrees with him. He looks around the room and says, "I know that in my heart and in my bones that there is no opponent that this team cannot conquer. You will win not because of me, because you guys will work together. And together you can achieve anything." This really pumps up the group, and they're ready to take it to Man City the next day. But Man City really isn't on Ted's mind at the moment. When he gets home, he finally gets to FaceTime Michelle, and she tells him some troubling news about the bullying situation. Up until this point, Ted thought it was Henry who was bullied. No, it was Henry who was doing the bullying. Ted wants to talk to him because he's troubled by this, but Michelle says, "Yeah, he's at the park right now. Jake thought it'd be a good thing to get outside and get some fresh air." So now, not only does Ted know that his son is being a bully, but he knows that his son is getting this fatherly advice from his former therapist. For Ted, this is his hell. But he does have to forget about it because the next day they have the big match against Man City. Before they go out, Beard and Roy give Ted some words of encouragement because they can tell that his mind's not really in it. They then have to go out to the pitch, but there's one person missing, and it's Zava. He just didn't show up, and no one quite knows where he is. So Colin's back in the starting lineup, but everybody's wondering where the team's best player is, including Ted. They're going to have to go this one without Zava, and it doesn't go their way. They get absolutely hammered again. When Rebecca gets back up to her office after the game, she finds out from Leslie where Zava was because word has gotten out that he's hinting at retirement. Before she can even process this information, she gets a phone call from her doctor with the update. It's hard to really tell what news she gets because all she says is, "Yes, right, that's what I thought." She does seem kind of thrown off by what she hears on the other end of that phone. She calls up Keely, but Keely doesn't answer because Keely had a really busy day at KJPR. It turns out Jack does like her. She actually sides with Keely in a debate between Keely and Barbara on the future of the company. Barbara thinking that they should expand and Keely wanting to stay boutique. And at least Keely has gained a friend in Jack because she's losing one in Shandy. Shandy's still pissed off about the whole banter thing. So yeah, she's still mad and her attitude sucks. Jack hears all of this, and once Shandy leaves, Jack tells Keely how she could appropriately fire Shandy, which is something that Keely hadn't thought of. But once Keely gets back from lunch, Shandy makes her own grave because Barbara comes in to let her know that Shandy called up a client at 4 a.m. and was pretty harassing to them. It caused the client to fire KJPR. And that is just the straw that breaks the camel's back, and Keely has to let Shandy go. And Shandy does not take it well. She tries to pull a Jerry Maguire, storming out to the sales office and saying, "All right, I'm starting my own firm. Who's with me?" And no one really is. She leaves, but she eventually comes back, and as a parting gift, she puts a baby goat in the conference room, which craps all over the place, stinks up the entire office, and forces Keely and Jack to miss the Richmond match. This allows Jack and Keely to bond, though, and boy, do they ever bond. As they drink some of Shandy's alcohol that she hid around the office, Keely eventually kisses Jack, and it leads to the two hooking up in the office. But when they're hooking up, Keely misses Rebecca's phone call, and in that moment, Rebecca really needed Keely because she needed somebody to talk to about what she heard from her doctor. On top of it, her club is in shambles. After the match, Ted's mind was still focused back home in Kansas, and as he stood at the Pyramid of Success, he couldn't stop thinking about it, and he could feel a panic attack coming on. He snaps out of it, though, when he hears his phone ring, and it's finally Henry. He's finally able to talk to him one-on-one. Henry owns up to his mistake and says that he's made good with the kid that he bullied, and they set up time later that night where they can play video games together online. But as Ted is talking to Henry out in the locker room, Leslie is informing the team of the unfortunate news that Zava has retired. And then Zava makes a video statement. He basically says that he's done with football, he's played his last match, and he's going to live his days on a farm with his family. This news is heartbreaking to some, mainly Danny Rojas, who really grew attached to Zava. Ted, who knows about the news at this point, walks out to address the team, but he doesn't address Zava. He just tells them that they'll get this thing back on track. There's no practice. He basically acts like it's business as usual. Until Sam brings up Zava, and it kind of forces Ted to address the elephant in the room. Ted says that Zava was great, but he wants guys that want to be here. And clearly Zava didn't. He knows that deep down, they can win with the current team that they have. There's no reason they can't. And all they need to do is believe it. And as he says that, the believe sign once again comes down because it was never fixed. All the players think it's a sign. And Ted says, "No, you're right, it is a sign. Guys, it's just that. It's just a sign." He grabs it and starts tearing it up. He turns to everybody and says, "Belief doesn't just happen because you hang something on a wall. Belief happens because of what's inside of you. A lot of time, you have so much crap inside of you that crap gets in the way of the belief. But I don't want to mess around with that crap anymore. You know what I want to mess around with? The belief that I matter, whether I achieve something or not. Or the belief that we all deserve to be loved. Or how about the belief of hope? That's something I want to mess with. Believing that things can get better, that I can make them better. And if each of you can do that, if you can truly do that, Can't nobody rip that apart. This little speech puts the team's mind back on track. In episode 6, the team goes to Amsterdam for a friendly. And as Ted learns, a friendly is a really fancy way in soccer of saying an exhibition. The team gets hammered. Roy probably has the best answer in a post-game presser ever. He's asked about the team's struggles, and he says, "This is a friendly. It's a fake game. You're a fake reporter. These are fake questions. None of this matters." And he walks away. He didn't really even want to do the post-game presser, but he was asked by Keely, and he's still in good terms with her, so he agreed. But Keely isn't staying in Amsterdam. She's asked by Rebecca if she wants to hang out, but no, Keely has plans with Jack. So as soon as the game's over, she runs off. And that's something that Roy notices. He asks Rebecca where she's going, and Rebecca wisely says, to somebody who appreciates her. The team, though, is playing extremely stiff. It can't be ignored. So even though they just got crushed, Ted decides no practice tomorrow. He announced to the team, guys, go out, live it up. We're in Amsterdam. Go have fun. Let loose. I'll see you tomorrow on the bus when we head home. But upon this announcement, Roy announces to Jamie, yeah, you're not doing that. We're still training. He's not happy about what's going on with Keely, and he's going to take it out on Jamie. At least he planned on it. Jamie loves Amsterdam. He basically takes Roy on a tour of Amsterdam, acting like he's an Amsterdam expert. At one point, he decides, you know what, let's get some bikes and do a bike tour. But he learns that Roy Kent has no idea how to ride a bike. He was planning on learning from his grandfather, but then his grandfather died, and he just never learned how. But Jamie isn't deterred by that at all. He decides in that moment to teach Roy how to ride a bike. Roy gets really frustrated, but after a while, he picks it up, and the two head off to go find a windmill, an actual windmill in Amsterdam. Turns out they actually get along quite well. They aren't the only twosome, though, to split up. Higgins asks Will, the equipment manager, if he wants to hang out with him, and Will says, yeah, that'd be great. And Higgins tells him, all right, our first stop tonight is the red light district, which was something that Will didn't expect. But when they actually get to the red light district, it's not what Will was expecting. Now, Higgins is a jazz aficionado. He's obsessed with that kind of music. And there was a jazz musician who was famous who died in the red light district. So Higgins wanted to stop off and see the area that he died to pay respects to the legend. The second stop they go to is a jazz club. Higgins really wants to show Will live jazz music, which, as it turns out, Will likes quite a bit. But the two are front row center, and Higgins is really getting into the bass quite a bit, and the people on stage notice it. So they call Higgins up to perform live on stage, and Higgins revels in it. He's loving it, and he also crushes it. But he's not the only one who crushes something, because Will gets the eye of a couple, and they end up inviting him back for a threesome. So good for Will. He got laid. Ted had planned on hanging out with Beard, but he also texts Rebecca to see if she wants to hang out as well. Beard and Ted are planning on going to dinner, and Ted's looking up restaurants. The first one that catches his eye is a place called the Yankee Doodle Burger Barn. They came all the way to Amsterdam, and Ted wants to go to an American-themed restaurant, which Beard really isn't into. As Beard is getting ready, though, Ted mentions how he currently feels stuck. He needs to do something to get himself out of his own head. Beard comes out of the bathroom and says, I've been waiting for you to say those words for a very long time. Because even though they're in Amsterdam, Beard has brought his own drugs with him. Ted isn't so sure about taking stuff. Beard convinces him, though, that by taking some hallucinogens, it will definitely change the way that Ted sees the world, and it could inspire him. So he puts the stuff in 2 glasses of tea and pours one for him and one for Ted. Beard drinks his pretty quickly. Ted, however, has some reservations. They wait a little bit, and finally Ted turns to Beard and says, you know, if you want to go, and Beard doesn't think twice, telling Ted, yeah, I'll see you in the morning, and he leaves. So Ted's just left alone with this glass of tea. He once again texts Rebecca to see what she's up to, but she's been blowing him off all day. He gets sick of just sitting in his hotel room, so he drinks most of the tea and heads out. The first place he heads by himself is to a Van Gogh exhibit. The museum guide actually says some beautiful words to Ted about finding inspiration through beauty. Like Vincent, he implores Ted to never stop doing what he's meant to do, because if you're meant to do it, you need to always try. He then gives Ted a book and tells him that they close in 10 minutes, so Ted's got to get going. He gets a little hungry, so he decides to head to that burger barn. And it is as hokey as one would expect. You got 3 sections you can sit in: the Windy City, the Big Apple, or Hollywood. And the host doesn't even know that Windy City is Chicago. But Ted sits down, gets a huge portion of food, and all of a sudden, that tea kicks in. As he's sitting there watching an old basketball game of Michael Jordan and the Bulls, one that he actually watched as a kid with his father, he gets inspired via the triangle offense. He starts thinking about triangles, where they came from, the origins. But then he starts thinking about triangles in the sense of soccer. And he starts frantically mapping out plays using, at first, the book that he was given, and then next, ketchup and mustard bottles. Now, his team, they didn't have as inspiring of a night. With all the freedom in the world, they decided that they would do something fun, but they couldn't agree on anything. They tried for hours. They threw out some ideas, including going to see a sex show, but no one could agree on one thing, and Isaac was very adamant that the team has to pick something to do together. They can't even agree on what food to eat, and finally, some of the alcohol starts talking, but Isaac gets tired of it, and he stands up and he yells at the group. So Sam grabs a piece of paper and writes down, "pillow fight." And they all agree. Yeah, that's how they're going to spend their night. Grown men with pillows and feathers flying everywhere. But they love it, and it does help bond the team. Although one member who is missing is Colin. He decided to bow out, saying that he didn't want to go to a sex show, which was originally going to be the plan. He wanted to go to a sex show, but it was a different kind of sex show. He slipped off to a gay bar. As he's ordering a drink, Trent Krim comes in, and Colin gets completely spooked. He rushes out of the bar so he's not caught by Trent, and Trent runs after him and says, "Colin, I've known for months, and there's probably a good reason why I haven't said anything. Think about it." This immediately puts Colin's mind at ease. They go, they grab a drink, they talk about Trent coming out to his wife and how happy his child currently is, but the struggle of keeping that lie was too much for him, and he doesn't understand how Colin's able to do it. Colin tells him that nobody at the team knows, and he'd like to think that nobody would care, but he doesn't want to put him in that situation. But it does seem like having somebody know that is close to the team is helping put his mind at ease. And for the rest of the night, he and Trent go and hang out at a gay bar and have a blast together. So that's what the team was up to. The owner, she wasn't blowing off Ted's text just because she was mad at him. She wasn't. She actually fell into a canal. She was rescued by a decent-looking guy on a houseboat. She was soaking wet, so he let her change, dry her clothes, hop in the shower to clean up a bit, and he even gave her some tea, promising that he didn't drug her. They ended up talking, chatting, really getting along. Turns out that this guy had a long-term girlfriend, but she cheated on him. And he was in a bad place, but he's no longer like that at all. Guy's former military, he owns a house, he owns a boat, albeit they're the same thing, but he seems like the total package. Oh, and he can cook. I mean, Rebecca really gets along with this guy, to the point where when her clothes finally are dry, she decides to throw some alcohol on them so they're wet again, so she can spend more time with this guy. He wraps up the night by giving her an incredible foot massage that actually puts her to sleep. When she wakes up the next morning, she has to ask him, "Hey, did we hook up?" And he says, No, we didn't. He offers to cook her breakfast, but she says, "No, I got to get going." And right before she leaves, she tells him, "I'll never forget you." And then she kisses him. But she never even gets the guy's name. She never even gives her name to him. It's just a really, really good night. Rebecca heads back to the hotel to join the team on the bus, and everybody is in a good mood. Ted thinks he's revolutionized the game of soccer. He shows Beard, who somehow found his way into a animal-themed David Bowie band during the night. And Beard loves it, but he has to reveal to Ted that it was actually a theme that was created in Holland. This whole triangle offense, positionless soccer. He then, though, reveals to Ted that they got a bad batch of tea. He was able to confirm it with the bus driver back in Richmond who gave him the batch. So it turns out that Ted wasn't tripping. He literally came up with this inspiration on his own. But it is something that they definitely are going to try once they get back to Richmond. And once they get back to Richmond, they've got a bus full of people that are flying high, good spirits and all. In episode 7, when Sam gets back into town, he heads to his restaurant. He's really excited because his dad is finally coming into town, so he's going to be able to see it. But most of the staff, including his head chef, Simi, is more concerned with the political situation. There's a boat of refugees headed to Britain, but there's one politician who wants to close up the borders. She doesn't want to let them in, even though the refugees include women and children. Simi is really, really pissed off about it, and Sam just tries to cheer her up because, as he says, it's way too early for you to be this angry. After checking in on the restaurant, though, he has to head to the training facility to go through practice. And at practice, Ted decides to introduce the team to total football. The idea that he dreamt up in a somewhat fever dreamish state, but was actually created years earlier. Beard gives a whole presentation on its origins, its ideas, who uses it, who's been successful with it. And the idea of it is positionless football. If you want to jump up in the rush, that's fine, but somebody needs to know to drop back. All of the team is kind of hesitant to buy into this idea. And Roy gets up and yells at all of them, "This is what we're doing. We're going to train this, and in a couple of months, we'll be experts at total football." But there was a communication disconnect between Roy, Beard, and Ted, because Ted informs him, "No, we're actually doing this today, and we're going to unveil it this week." And Roy says, "Well, that's just dumb." But they try it day 1. It doesn't go great, and after practice, Beard and Ted head off to the bar. When May, the bartender and owner, drops off the beer, they can tell that she's disappointed, and she explains that when Richmond isn't doing well, business doesn't do well. So yeah, she isn't in the best mood. And neither are the supporters. They walk up to Ted and tell him that they got too soft on him. It's pretty clear that when they were hard on him, the team performed better. And Ted understands their frustration, so he actually invites them to come watch practice all week. Beard thinks this is a wild idea, but as Ted says, hey, it's their team. We're just renting it for a bit. The next day, when they show up to the training facility, there are the supporters sitting there, wanting to see what Ted Lasso has in store. He tells the group that there are 4 things they need to focus on. Number 1 is conditioning. They have to be able to run up and down the pitch, and then some. Number 2 is versatility. They need to be able to play everywhere. Number 3 is awareness, because they have to know where to play and when. And then number 4, well, Ted doesn't know what that one is yet, but he'll get to it later. So they start off with the conditioning, and Roy runs them to death. After practice, Sam decides to go head back to the restaurant where the refugee story has gotten bigger, because the boat is on the outskirts of England, and it's a big story on whether or not the officials will let them into the country. The politician that Simi hates had some bold remarks about the situation. She says anybody trying to enter the country illegally will tell them that England is closed. Simi cannot stand this woman. She thinks that she's ruining the country with this ideology. And Sam says, maybe somebody can speak to this clearly misguided person. So he writes off a tweet. It simply reads, "Profoundly disturbed by the situation in Portsmouth Harbor. I hope Brenda Barrow will reconsider her position and help make Britain better than this." He fires off the tweet and doesn't really think much of it. The next day, Sam, along with his teammates, head to practice. Now they're going to work on versatility. So Ted gives everybody a card and makes them switch positions. Everybody except Jamie, that is. They let him say striker, and he can't quite figure out why. But he goes along with it. After 3 days of this, it's been a pretty big disaster. So much so that Trent Krim comes in and asks Ted if he really thinks this is a good idea. And Ted admits he has no idea. It could go either way, but he's willing to try something new. Now, the 4th day of practice, things just get weird. They work on awareness, and the way they do this is by tying strings to one another's tails. Because if somebody's going to go up, then the other person needs to go back, so you need to be aware of where your teammates are at all times. And Roy figured that this would be the way to do it. It's a bold training tactic, and it doesn't work at all. But after practice, Sam comes off the pitch, opens his phone, and there's a tweet from that politician, Brenda Barrow. She says that Sam should worry less about the safety of our nation and worry more about being a mediocre player on a mediocre team. Hashtag shut up and dribble. This comment hurts, and Sam decides to respond with saying, well, I'd rather be a mediocre player than a world-class bigot. Before practice the next day, Sam decides to once again head to the restaurant, but he's surprised at what he finds, because the whole place has been absolutely destroyed. Burglars broke in and just ransacked the place. And they wrote on the wall, "Shut up and dribble." Sam is infuriated. He shows up to the pitch a little bit late. Isaac tries to joke with him, but he loses his cool. And Isaac says, "What's your problem?" And that's when Sam just goes off. He yells at everybody in the room that the world is full of evil people who do crappy things, but I can't deal with that right now because I have to go kick a little ball around. Which, by the way, those same people love me for, unless I mess up, and then they hate me again, and they want to ship me back to where I came from. Sam is irate. It takes all of the team back. Well, more than the team, it takes his father back, because Sam was unaware that his dad was in the room. And when Sam sees his father, he just walks up to him and cries into his arms. The team and Ted give Sam a little bit of time alone so they can chat it out. Sam reveals to his dad that he doesn't even know if he's going to reopen the restaurant. And his dad said, "That's ridiculous, Sam. You absolutely have to open the restaurant. Do it for the people that come here looking for a taste of home. And as for the people who did this, if you really want to piss them off, forgive them. Yeah, just act like it's nothing." This chat with his dad does a lot for Sam to make him feel better about the situation. But it also means a lot to Sam and his dad when Ted walks up and says, "Hey, if you want to sit out, you can." Although his dad says, "Oh, no, he's not sitting out. He's going to practice." As the team is training, though, Rebecca finally is able to sit down with Keely and tell her all about what happened in Amsterdam with this mystery man. Keely can buy the fact that they didn't exchange names. She can buy the fact that they didn't exchange numbers. What she can't buy is the fact that they didn't have sex. But as Rebecca says, what we had that night, it transcended sex, although I would have liked to at least look at it. She then, though, asks Keely about her relationship with Jack, and it's going great, but there is one issue. Jack is buying Keely everything. It's a first edition book of one of her favorite books. It's filling up her office with flowers. And Rebecca warns her, "Oh, she's love bombing you. Yeah, she's buying you all of these things at first. Rupert did the same thing to me." And I'm not saying that Jack is Rupert, but what I'm saying is those shiny things, they tarnish. So just be aware and trust your gut, because I ignored a lot of red flags. The two women hang out again the next day, but this time it's at the match. Richmond is heading to Arsenal, and Rebecca has a very, very awkward interaction with Sam's father, who knows all about their relationship. Keely kind of saves her from that one. And luckily they don't have to talk too much because the match kicks off, and Richmond is struggling to get the whole total football down. They find themselves losing 3-0 at the half. Beard asks if they should just go back to the good old days, but Coach doesn't want to do that. He gives a whole speech about his mustache and facial hair and the blue-collar comedy tour, but deep down, the whole meaning of it is you got to get through some bad to find the good. So what they're going through now is nothing more than growing pains. Jamie then speaks up to the group and tells them that everybody is playing total football wrong, including himself. He's listed as striker, but what he should be doing is he should be playing midfield, because the whole game should be going through him. He shouldn't be the one scoring the goals. He should be setting them up. This logic makes sense to everybody, and when they go out in the second half, they execute it. They finally look like they're working as a team for the first time in weeks. They still lose. They lose 3-1, but they look better doing it. After the game, Trent Krim is the most pumped up person in the room. He says that total football is going to work for this team because of the Ted Lasso effect. And what the Ted Lasso effect is over 3 seasons, he slowly but surely started building a club-wide culture of trust and support through thousands of imperceptible moments. That is the Lasso effect. And there's no bigger example of the trust and support than what happens when they get back to Richmond. Sam is driving his father around, and he asks his dad, "Do you want to go see the restaurant, even though it's destroyed?" And his dad says, "Yeah, absolutely." But when they get there, it's not destroyed anymore, because the team felt so bad for what happened to Sam that they secretly called Simi up and tried to fix it. The entire team is in there, fixing up the windows, painting over the graffiti, cleaning up the chairs. It really touches Sam's heart. Sam is also able to introduce his dad to Simi, who he's talked about quite a bit. And to reward everybody, his father gets in the kitchen and starts whipping them up a meal, because after all, the restaurant is named after him. And speaking of meals, Nate finally gets his date with Jade. It took a lot of hemming and hawing, but he finally just nutted up and asked her out, and she accepted. So the two sit down and have a meal, not at the restaurant that she works at. In episode 8, on the pitch, everything's going great. The Greyhounds are flourishing. They've won 4 in a row. But in his personal life, things are awkward. Michelle visited along with Henry. That should be the good thing, but they brought a guest, Jake Jacobson. That's right, Dr. Jacobson, the man that heard all of their marital problems and then decided to be the ultimate interloper with a stupid name. You can't tell, I'm on Team Ted with this one. But Ted's handling it about as well as one could expect. It's awkward for everybody involved, but Ted's trying to focus on the fact that he does get to spend time with Henry. He does, however, get really concerned when he hears Michelle say that Jake is taking her to Paris. And the reason why he gets concerned is the fact that Paris has always been a dream vacation for Michelle. It's got her favorite hotel, her favorite museum, even though she's never been. So what Ted's thinking is that Jake is going to propose to Michelle, and that is consuming his mind. So much so that he has to have a Diamond Dogs meeting to ask about where everybody would get engaged if they had a dream location, and everybody said Paris. The Diamond Dogs, though, make him feel a lot better by saying, well, Ted, you're getting obsessed over something that hasn't even happened yet. You probably should wait for it to actually happen to feel this way. So Ted's going to need some answers. That requires hiring a private investigator, and he goes to talk to Rebecca about that. And Rebecca, much like the Diamond Dogs, try to put his mind at ease, but he tells her, I have to know. So Rebecca's going to hire a private investigator to follow the couple around to figure out if they are, in fact, getting engaged. He then goes down to focus on practice, and the big story in the locker room is that there was a giant data leak of a bunch of celebrities. Nudes, videos, the whole shebang. They're calling it the Great Awakening. They all have a conversation about the ethics of looking at the pictures. People like Isaac think that you shouldn't because those pictures weren't meant for you. Other people in the room think that, hey, it's fair game. And people like Jamie think that the real enemy here is people who stole the data. But as they're talking, they then see a familiar name on the list of celebrities whose videos are out there. Keely. It's a surprise to everybody, and Isaac tells everybody in the room to delete all of the news that they have on their phone. Because now it's close. They actually know somebody affected by this. And he doesn't want it happening to his teammates. One person who's really, really concerned about this is Colin, because the nudes that he has on his phone are a little bit different than everybody else. So when Isaac commands everybody to delete everything right then and there, Colin decided to walk out of the room to privately delete his photos. And Isaac got mad. He followed him out there and said, dude, what did I tell you? Delete it right now. And he just instinctively grabs his cell phone and he sees what Colin was looking at. He doesn't say anything. He just nods, gives the phone back, and walks back in the locker room. But Colin's secret is out to at least one teammate. And as for Keely, she's not handling this all that well. She was in bed with Jack. They were discussing how they were going to go and spend time with Jack's uncle at a polo match. And that's when her phone started blowing up and she saw the video. She starts panicking, but Jack reassured her, don't worry, I'll take care of this. Keely, though, found out what take care of it meant when she got to her PR firm. Barbara handed her a statement from Jack that Jack wants Keely to put on her social media accounts. And it's pretty cold. The statement that Jack wants Keely to read is essentially, I am very sorry, I'm regretful, I vow to do better. It's a statement that you would write for someone who just had a DUI hit and run, not somebody whose video she made for a boyfriend leaked on the internet. Because of that, she gets pretty upset. She goes to talk to Rebecca about it, and Rebecca tells her this is nothing more than lawyer BS. I guarantee that Jack didn't actually write that for you. She just passed it down the pipeline. Go and talk to her about it. Let her explain herself. When Keely goes to leave the pitch that day, though, she runs into Roy, and Roy apologizes to her. He feels really bad about what's going on, but then he makes a mistake by asking her, who did you make that video for? And she's disgusted. As soon as Roy asks it, he knows he made a mistake. And Roy doesn't get the answer to this, but she made it for Jamie back in the day because it was Jamie whose data was leaked. Keely, though, heads home. She does ask Jack about the statement, and just like Rebecca said, Jack blames lawyers. When Keely tells Jack that she can't do it, she can't make that statement, Jack understands and says that's fine. But while Jack tried to be supportive, deep down, she did want Keely to make a statement. Because after a fun day of going to miniature golf, she does rework the statement to make it sound more human, but it causes a big fight between her and Keely. Keely feeling like she shouldn't have to make a statement that makes it sound like she's sorry for making a video for a boyfriend, because she's not sorry. And Jack feeling like this is a really bad look. The girl that she's dating, whose PR firm she's funding, just had this video leak out. But what really sets the fight off is that Jack thinks Keely should be embarrassed about this video, and Keely doesn't think she should be embarrassed about the video. So the status of Jack and Keely is kind of up in the air at this point. But after Jack leaves, Keely does get a visitor, Jamie. Jamie feels horrible about what happened. Even though Keely tells him that it's not his fault, he feels like ultimately it is, because the video was sent to him, and he reassures her that he did delete the video, but he forgot about emails. She can tell that Jamie is genuinely sorry for this, and she gives him a big hug. She really appreciates it. While one relationship is dying, another is blooming. Nate and Jade are doing really good. She slept over. They did sex stuff. That's cool. Nate, though, is wondering what exactly they are. I mean, the guy did just lose his virginity, so he's thinking this could be the one. But the relationship is in such an infancy stage that he just doesn't know what to make of it. So he decides to bring the Diamond Dogs to West Ham. It doesn't really go over all that well, though. He invites Rupert. He doesn't even show up. The West Ham version of Leslie thinks he's getting fired. The assistant coach doesn't want to be there. They don't really give Nate any good advice. And Nate realizes that the West Ham version of the Diamond Dogs is probably a one and done. Nate, though, has to get ready for a match anyway. But as he's out there coaching, his assistant coach says, "Yo, look behind you. You're never going to believe it." And Nate turns around, and there's Lasso, Beard, and Henry. And Henry is sporting a West Ham jersey. Because with Michelle and Jake in Paris, that gave Ted the opportunity to spend the entire day with Henry, and Ted didn't have work. So he asked Henry, "What do you want to do?" And Henry told him, "I want to go to see a football match." The only one in town was West Ham. So this wasn't like they had their pick of the litter, but Henry was excited to see Nate in action, because Henry doesn't know about the bad blood between Nate and Ted, even though that bad blood's pretty one-sided at this point. The image, though, of Ted being at the West Ham match does reach Twitter, the press, and Rupert texts Nate after the match and says, "Hey, I'm sorry about that. It'll never happen again." Initially, Nate says, don't worry about it. I thought it was funny." But he deletes that and says, "Good." When he gets to his apartment later that night, he is spending time with Jade, and she can't figure out why he doesn't want to celebrate the West Ham victory that day. And it's because all Nate can do is look at the picture of Ted, Beard, and Henry in the stands cheering him on, and he's got mixed emotions about it. But Jade points out, they look like they're happy for you, so you should be happy for you. And then she refers to Nate as her boyfriend. And that immediately puts Nate in a much better headspace. As for Ted, after the match, Ted, Beard, and Henry went to Maze, and that's when Ted got the phone call from Rebecca, giving him the insight that her private detective came up empty. As far as he knows, Michelle and Jake didn't get engaged. But Rebecca has a very important message for Ted. Stop focusing on the past. Your relationship with Michelle, it's over. Go spend time with Henry. You're lucky that you get to be in his life. And you're so focused on your ex-wife getting engaged that you're losing precious moments with your son. Ted realizes that his boss is right, and he walks over and rejoins Beard and Henry, who are belting out "Hey Jude." Her private investigator was also right. Michelle didn't get engaged. And it seems like Ted realized he spent the majority of this trip worried about something that never even happened. In episode 9, we'll start out at West Ham, where Nate is enjoying life. His team is at the top of the table, and his relationship with Jade is going great as well. She actually stops by one day to give him lunch. But while he's thanking her, Rupert stops by. Nate introduces Jade to Rupert, Rupert to Jade. And if you didn't know Rupert, you would think he was friendly enough. But because we do know Rupert, he's a dick. Very dismissive, and you can tell he doesn't think much of a hostess. When it comes time for match day, as Nate is walking out to the pitch, Rupert says, "Hey, after the game, why don't me and you go out for a drink later?" And Nate says, "Yeah, that'd be great. Should I bring Jade?" But Rupert says, "No, just a boys' night." Although after the game, he finds out it's anything but a boys' night because he goes to the club that Rupert invited him to, and Rupert has 2 girls waiting. Nate is so turned off by the fact that Rupert is basically asking him to cheat on his girlfriend that he makes up a poor excuse on why he has to leave, one that Rupert knows is bullshit, and he walks out, actually going straight to Jade's apartment because she's the only one that he wants to be with. Now, over with Nate's former club, Richmond, things are also going great. The whole total football thing has really caught on, and Roy has to admit, yeah, I thought this was stupid, but it seems to be working out pretty well. The team is flourishing. They've won 7 in a row, and things are really looking up for Ted's club. At least that's what it seems. There is some inner turmoil. It's really only between 2 players, Isaac and Colin. And that's because ever since Isaac found out about Colin's secret, he's been giving him the cold shoulder. Colin's tried to talk to Isaac about it, offering to go get a drink and discuss, but Isaac doesn't want anything to do with him. He's completely ignoring him. Ted doesn't know about any of this, though. As far as he's concerned, the club is happy. After a practice one day, he heads up to Rebecca's office where he finds Keely crying. That's because Jack has completely ghosted her. Jack saying she wanted to take a break certainly seems like it means break up. So Rebecca was being a good friend and consoling her in the moment. The reason why Ted actually showed up, though, wasn't to make Keely feel better, although he does feel bad. It was to let Rebecca know that he won't be able to do the press conference that day. He's got Zoom meetings with Henry's teachers, and he doesn't want to miss it. Keely actually suggests that Roy do it. Even though he hates that kind of thing, he's really good at it. So later on, Keely and Rebecca head down to the locker room to find Roy, and they tell him, you're going to be doing the press conference. And Roy is not happy finding out that he will be the one to address the media. But he grits his teeth, and he tells both Keely and Rebecca that he'll reluctantly do it. Although, when it comes time to actually address the media, Roy's nowhere to be found. It's actually Beard getting into a very spirited debate with the media over the greatest guitarist of all time. Leslie doesn't know what's going on, so he goes and gets Rebecca, and Rebecca is just as confused as Leslie because she told Roy you're doing it. She didn't expect Beard to be arguing about Jimmy Page. But she quickly stops that press conference, and just to keep things organized, she tells the media, hey, if you have any questions for me. But their only question is the greatest guitarist of all time, and she stupidly answers, the guy from Cream. When she gets out of there, she's pissed off, though. She specifically told Roy that he was to address the media, and then he blew it off, and everyone chalks it up to just, oh, that's Roy being Roy. Yeah, well, she's done with that. She has to go into boss mode. She storms into the training facility and yells at Roy, get in my office right now. When Roy does show up, she yells at him for skipping the press conference, and he apologizes, but does so in a manner that doesn't really seem like he's sorry. He just says, I didn't know it was a big deal to you. And she rips into him. She basically gives him the same speech that he gave her last year when she was dating that average Joe type fella. She criticizes him for giving up when things are tough or they're not fun. And this whole woe is me act that he does, it's old. The problem is, in her mind, that Roy has convinced himself he doesn't deserve to be happy. And he needs to change that philosophy quickly. Now, one person who is trying to be happy is Colin. He wants to fix this thing with Isaac. Isaac's one of his best friends on the team, and now he's not talking to him all because he found out that he's gay. He goes to Trent for some advice, and Trent's advice is just give him time. Like, he probably shouldn't need it, but some people do. You've known you were gay your entire life. He just found out. But if you give him time, I'm sure he'll come around. The day of the match, though, Isaac is still giving Colin the cold shoulder. So much so that when they put their hands in to do the 1, 2, 3 Richmond, Colin puts his on top of Isaac's, and Isaac moves it. It seems like Colin's mood is carrying on over into the game as well. He seems very distracted and just out of sorts. But Colin also seems a little bit out of sorts. He makes an errant pass that leads to a goal, and Isaac screams at him. It's very uncharacteristic, but it leaves Richmond down 1-0 at the half. As they're leaving, some fan has some choice words for the team, but he crosses the line when he says the F word. And I'm not talking about fug. No, I'm talking about the one that is really, really crossing the line. When Isaac hears it, he actually storms into the stands and confronts the fan. Doing so is against the rules. It earns Isaac a red card, and red cards mean that you're kicked out of the game. So Richmond will now have to play the rest of the game a man down. But nobody knows exactly what's going on with Isaac. This is a completely out of character. So much so that Roy Kent has become the voice of reason, which no one expected. When they finally get everybody back in the locker room, it's pretty quiet. And Ted has to go, oh, okay, so no one's going to say something? Well, I'll say it. Isaac, what the hell's going on with you? Isaac, though, doesn't want to say it. He doesn't want to expose Colin. He doesn't want to give him his secret. He doesn't even want to say the word. But Sam overheard it, and he tells the team what the guy had said. While Ted sympathizes with Isaac because it's a completely out-of-line insult that the fan had said, he also criticizes Isaac because he's put the team in a tough situation. Now they're one man down. The team kind of dismisses it, telling him, look, man, we've all heard that before. But there's one member of the team that is staying quiet, and that's Colin. He's got a lot of nervous energy right now. But Isaac, constantly hearing from his teammates that it's just something he needs to get over, it's nothing they haven't heard before, pisses him off even more. He finally freaks out at everybody and says, we shouldn't have to deal with this. What if one of us was gay? And then he walks out. Roy goes after him to make him feel a little bit better about the situation, but the rest of the team, they're left wondering if Isaac is gay. And they feel like he probably is. That outburst just seemed like it was out of left field. The reaction to the word seemed really personal. So the entire team starts talking about how they're going to support Isaac in this moment, because that's exactly what he needs. But Colin cannot sit back and let the entire team think that his friend is gay, knowing full well that he isn't. So Colin bravely stands up in front of the entire team and tells them, guys, Isaac's not gay. I am. To Colin's relief, everybody is super, super supportive. Most of them say things like, Colin, we don't care. But Ted stops and says, no, Colin, that's not true. We do care. He then goes on to tell a story about when he was a kid and he lived in Kansas City. Surrounded by Chiefs fans, he had a friend who was a Broncos fan. And he told the Broncos fan, I don't care that you're a Broncos fan. But that Broncos fan had to watch the Broncos in the Super Bowl alone. And Ted realized that he was a bad friend. Yeah, he said he didn't care, but he should have been there with his buddy. Instead, he, quote, didn't care. And his buddy was left alone to eat dip. Yeah, it's a questionable analogy, but it also makes a lot of sense. And it makes Colin feel a lot better when Ted says, we do care, and we're with you, 100%. With the team rallying around Colin, they head out to the pitch motivated, and they come back. They win 2-1 for their 8th straight, and Colin is the man of the match. He was incredible in this one. After the game, though, nobody wants to talk about the come-from-behind win. They want to talk about Isaac's outburst. Normally, Ted would handle the podium, but no, this time it's Roy. He heard what Rebecca said, and he's going to heed her advice. So he steps up, reluctantly. And he does the press conference in a very Roy Kent fashion. The first question is about Isaac and whether the organization condones it. And, of course, Roy says no. And then the question is, well, then why did he do it? Roy doesn't answer that question, but what he does do is tell a story from when he was a youngster at Sunderland. There was an older player, and him and his wife were pregnant for the first time. Roy made a snide remark about how there was a % chance that he was the father, and this older player went nuts. He beat the crap out of Roy. It was very uncharacteristic, and it actually got the guy kicked off the club. And because of this outburst, no other team would touch him. Roy realized later on that he was a dick for the comment, and he saw the guy in the pub about a year later. He apologized for the comment, and the guy told him that the reason why he really snapped was because him and his wife had lost the baby a month earlier. He didn't tell anybody. Nobody knew. He just kept it bottled up. So the point of this is, nobody knows what other people are going through. Yeah, fans buy a ticket. They think they can say whatever they want, but at the end of the day, we're just people. And footballers have the same problems as others. So Roy doesn't know why Isaac did what he did. Of course, that's a lie. He does. But he also tells the media, it's none of my business. Roy absolutely shines in this presser. At the end of the night, everybody goes home, including Colin, but he gets a knock at the door. And it's Isaac. Up until this point, Colin thought that Isaac was mad at him because he's gay. But it's actually the farthest thing from the case. Isaac was mad at Colin because Colin didn't tell him. That's what really upset Isaac. Colin didn't feel comfortable telling one of his best friends the truth, that he was hiding this. And Colin explains, I was 99% sure that you'd be okay with it, but that 1%, it gave me too much doubt. He then invites Isaac in, and the two discuss what it's like being a gay professional athlete. In episode 10, the Greyhounds continue to flourish on the pitch, but it is the international break. It's the point of the season where players go off and represent their home countries in international play. Some of those players are going to include Jamie Tart for England, Colin for Wales, and then the big match is going to be between Danny Rojas and Van Damme. Although Danny makes it painfully clear to Van Damme that he's not here to be his friend. They are currently enemies. The normally smiley, happy Danny Rojas has turned into an absolute stone-cold killer. The one person, though, surprisingly not chosen to represent their home country is Sam. And the slight is pretty big. The whole team feels bad for him because the whole team realizes that Sam Adesanya should be chosen for the Nigerian national team. Right before Ted goes off for the break, he goes and meets with Rebecca. Now, while things are going well with the Greyhounds, things have certainly taken a turn over at West Ham. Nate has resigned. He's out as head coach. They start hypothesizing what could have led to this, and Ted's like, it's none of my business, I really don't care. But according to Trent, he's hearing that it could be inappropriate workplace violations. And that just doesn't sound like Nate. Leslie then enters the meeting and he tells everybody that Edwin Akufu is back in town and he wants to start a Super League. Right after Leslie explains to Ted why a Super League would be horrible, Rebecca gets a phone call from Rupert, although she sends it straight to voicemail. That doesn't mean Rupert is going to give up, though. Later on in the day, when Rebecca's out of her office, she runs into Sam. She apologized to him that he didn't make the national team. It's a little bit of an awkward interaction between the two. But when she returns to her office, there's Rupert. He snuck in from the guy that works the sewers. Rupert figured that Rebecca wouldn't be returning his phone calls because, she hates him. But he wanted to get a hold of her because he wants to invite her to the meeting with Edwin Akufu. She's definitely suspicious, but she tells him, I'll give it some thought. As Rebecca thinks about what she's going to tell Rupert, everybody leaves the pitch behind. That includes Sam, who heads to his restaurant, and he's expecting a packed house because they were sold out, but he finds it empty. And that's because there's only one group there, and it's Edwin Akufu. He had called under fake aliases and booked the restaurant up only to cancel last minute. He also paid the Nigerian national team $20,000 to leave Sam off. And finally, he's looking to open a Nigerian restaurant just a few blocks away from Olu's. So time has not healed this wound for Edwin Akufu. Roy Kent had a better afternoon than Sam, that's for sure. Phoebe wanted to celebrate Uncle's Day, which is a made-up holiday that she created, but she just wanted to celebrate her favorite Uncle Roy. They had a little bit of a party that Roy is completely uncomfortable with the entire time, especially when he finds out that Phoebe invited Roy's best friend, Jamie. Now, both Jamie and Roy claim that they're not best friends, but as Phoebe points out to Roy, you talk about him all the time. You're always hanging out with him. So while they deny it, it does seem like Phoebe has a point. And it wasn't like Jamie came empty-handed. He brought Roy a gift. It's Roy's English national team jersey. Roy likes that a lot better than what Phoebe got him. She made him a tie-dye t-shirt with red, orange, and yellow because they spell out Roy. And it's just really not Roy's thing, but he accepts it anyway. He even wears it into the office the next day, which catches everybody by surprise. And while they don't have practice and they don't have a game, everybody came to the training facility because they want to watch the international games. They want to watch their teammates. Even Sam showed up, even though he's completely depressed. Now, Rebecca's not watching the game with her team. She's up in her office, but she's pondering what to do about this Rupert invitation. She's asked Keely, but Keely isn't getting back to her, so she asked Leslie his thoughts. What she's concerned with is the fact that Rupert only invited her because she's a woman, and it would look really good on the resume of the Super League if they had a woman representing them. And Leslie tells her, go. Take the meeting. Hey, at least you have a seat at the table. So, per Leslie's advice, Rebecca texts Rupert back and says, I'll be there. She then heads home, she reminds herself in the mirror who she is, and she heads off to go meet with this Edwin Akufu Super League. And it's as she expected. It's a lot of old white dudes who want to just line their pockets full of money. Edwin has a meal prepared beforehand, and then he makes his pitch. He's promising big returns for all of the teams invited. And some teams are immediately in. I mean, hey, who doesn't like more money? But Rebecca gets a text from Keely wishing her well, apologizing for not being able to get back to her, but giving her some advice, saying, just think of all of these old men as little boys. And it works. Rebecca envisions the whole table full of little boys, and she yells at them, saying, what the hell are you guys doing? I mean, do you really need more money? You guys own these football clubs, but you don't own the football club. You don't realize how much these teams mean to these communities. She then tells a story to the entire table about a little boy who loved Richmond, but his family didn't have money to afford tickets, so he would sneak in. Eventually, one day, he got caught by a security guard, and he kicked that security guard in the balls, and he fled. And he didn't return until 25 years later, when he bought the club. And the first thing he did was find that security guard and give him a raise. And didn't even tell him the reason why. And of course, that kid was Rupert. And the whole message is basically, football is for people. It's not just for you to get rich off of. Now, to the dismay of Edwin, this speech works. The vote doesn't pass, teams don't join, and Edwin is furious, throwing food at people. It leaves both Rupert and Rebecca to just crack up laughing at how ridiculous his response was. But through the laughing, Rupert gets the sense that maybe there's something there, and he goes to kiss Rebecca, although she pulls back. Yeah, that thought is still pretty gross to her. Rupert, though, wasn't the only person that's thinking about rekindling a relationship. So is Roy. He went to go pick up Phoebe at her school, sporting that brand new tie-dye t-shirt that she made him. He sees her teacher, and he's always had a pretty good relationship with her teacher. She's always flirted back at him. And she mentions how he looks better. He looks lighter. Like the last time she saw him, he was just bogged down in his own crap, but now he just looks more spry. They're talking with the teacher, though. He realizes that he has kind of messed up things with Keely. He feels like he should apologize. So he rushes off, he buys a notepad, and he starts trying to jot down an apology to her. He goes to deliver it thinking that she won't be home, but to his surprise, she is. And that's because Keely has had a bad few days. She went into KJPR to find it being raided. People were taking furniture out, and she wasn't sure why. And it was Barbara who told her that the funding was being pulled. Jack was supposed to get in touch with her, but apparently she never did. Eventually, Jack did get in touch with her, but it was via text. So unfortunately, Keely has lost her dream job. So that's why Keely's home when Roy stops by in the middle of the day. Keely reads the note, but then makes Roy read the note. And the note says that Keely never did anything wrong. It was all him. He feels really bad if she ever felt like she wasn't worth it or good enough, because she is. And he loves her. They end up going in, hooking up. It's cool. And then later on in the day, Rebecca stops by. Rebecca fills Keely in on why she's covered in food and how she was the baddest bitch at this meeting. Keely fills Rebecca in on everything that happened with the KJPR fallout. And Rebecca asks, well, how much money could they possibly be investing in this? Keely goes back and forth with Rebecca because Keely ultimately doesn't want to take her friend's money. But when Rebecca sees how much money it would take to keep Keely's PR company open, she laughs at it. She's like, I have this in my pocket. Yeah, we can keep your company open. They then have a good laugh about the whole Rupert trying to kiss her thing, with Keely pointing out that Rebecca would have to be at her lowest moment to hook up with her ex. And that's when Roy walks in the room. The next day, Keely walks back into KJPR, but she's all alone. She had given Barbara a goodbye gift. It was a snow globe. But as Keely is trying to make phone calls, Barbara walks back in. She tells Keely that she told Jack she no longer wants to work for her, and she wants to work for Keely. So KJPR has doubled the amount of employees they have to 2. That's the same day that everybody also comes back to the pitch from international play. And the weirdest thing is Van Dam has a broken nose because of Danny Rojas, but Danny is back to his old self. He's laughing, he's joking. It really freaks out Van Dam. And just like Danny, Rebecca has also had a change in attitude. When Ted comes up to give her morning biscuits, she tells him, Ted, I've realized I no longer care if I beat Rupert. Yeah, I want to beat Rupert, but I now want to win for all of us, for Richmond. not just to beat him. Now, it's unfortunate that they don't play Rupert's team right now because Rupert's team doesn't have a coach, and Nate is going through it. He's got paparazzi parked outside, and Jade comes and visits him, and what he's dealing with is the thought that he just made a horrible mistake, like he quit his dream job. Although when Jade asks, "Do you regret it?" he says no. He's just wondering if it was the wrong move. Jade has to go out of town for a few days, so he's all alone. And he doesn't want to be surrounded by paparazzi, so in the middle of the night, he sneaks back to his parents' place. He kind of hunkers down in his childhood room. But eventually, his parents go out to the farmer's market, and he's got the house all to himself. He goes up in the attic, he finds his old violin, and he starts playing it. But he's taken aback when he turns around and his dad is sitting there listening to him. His dad mentions how he misses listening to Nate play, and Nate's surprised at that because he vividly remembers his dad saying he hated listening to Nate play. And this leads to a heart-to-heart with Nate and his dad. His dad tells Nate, "I love you. It was just difficult for me because you're a genius. I mean, you've always seen things differently. So I wanted you to be the best. I wanted you to use your gift for good. I just didn't know how to go about doing that." For the first time, Nate feels like his dad truly does love him. Especially when his dad says, "Nate, all I wanted was for you to be happy." And for the first time since he won that day about a week ago, Nate is happy with him and his parents just playing cards. When he gets some free time, he decides to do a little bit of a redemption tour. He's able to sneak into the FC Richmond locker room, and he fixes all the kits, leaving a note for Will to find that says, "Sorry." The unbelievable season for FC Richmond continues with 2 games left, and they have a shot at winning the Premier League championship. The next game against Man City is huge because Man City is in first place. They're 4 points up. So winning or tying is a must if they want to hoist the trophy at the end. Normally, Ted would address the media, but he's not there because a special guest has arrived in town, his mother. He didn't know she was coming, and he's really uncomfortable when she shows up uninvited. But it's your mom, so you kind of have to entertain her. Because of this, Roy, Sam, and Jamie address the media. And for Roy and Sam, it's a normal press conference, but there's something going on with Jamie. He just is down on himself, which is weird because he just won the Premier League Player of the Month. But in his opinion, he didn't really deserve it. It's like that old, confident Jamie Tart is nowhere to be found, and in its place is an insecure little boy. Now, while they were addressing the media, Colin, Isaac, and Will went searching for someone. Nate the Great. Nate has rebounded, if you want to call it that. He's gotten a job at the Taste of Athens with Jade. And they get wind of it, so they head over there. But not to mock their former coach. No, it's actually to ask if he wants to come back to the team. Nate's certainly interested in it, but he asks, "So this was Ted's idea?" And they say, "No. We just wanted to make sure that you were open to coming back before we talked to Ted." And even though they tell him that the team wants him back, when Nate finds out that this wasn't Ted's idea, he says, "No, I'm okay with being a waiter." After getting this no, they head to the pitch, and everybody meets Mama Lasso. Everybody quickly falls in love with Mama Lasso. She tells story after story regarding Ted. The issue that Ted has is a lot of them are half-truths. And the guys don't care. Rebecca doesn't care. But Ted does. Because deep down he feels like his mother is there for an ulterior motive, but he hasn't quite figured out what it is yet. It gets to the point where Ted stops story time to tell everybody, "All right, we actually have to go practice. We got a big game against Man City." Zora gets ready to go out there, but he's going to be wearing a face mask. It's something that most of his teammates are making fun of him for because he just looks goofy. But Jamie doesn't. He says, "I think it's smart to think about safety first." And that's the final straw for Roy. He's got to figure out what is going on with the team's best player. So he pulls Jamie into the cleat room and he says, "All right, what's up?" And Jamie starts having a breakdown. He starts crying and shaking and says, "I don't know what's going on with me. I'm just tired. I can't sleep. I can't eat." He doesn't know what's wrong with him. And Roy doesn't know what's wrong with him. He also doesn't know what to do. So he goes and asks Keeley for help. He wants Keeley to come with them on the trip to Manchester because the two people that know Jamie the best are Roy and Keeley. And they know that it's going to be emotional going back home for Jamie because his dad might be in the stands. The last time they visited Manchester, it didn't go so well. So it's really a last-ditch effort, but it's one that Roy thinks is worth trying. Before Roy leaves to go ask Keeley for help, which she ultimately accepts, he's in Ted's office along with Beard when Leslie shows up, and he's actually the one that sent the players along with Will to go ask Nate if he wants to come back. Everybody's on board with it, except Beard. He tells Ted, if you bring that Judas back, I will burn this place to the ground. So bringing back Nate might have to wait a little bit. After practice, Beard, Ted, and Ted's mom go to May's pub. The boys are playing pinball. And while Ted's mom asks Beard how her son's doing, which Beard says, you know Ted, Ted is over in the corner trying to avoid small talk with his mom. When they get home that night, Ted's still a little bit on edge about his mother's arrival, but he's trying to handle it the best he can. She's not going to be coming to the game in Manchester City, even though she's invited. She's going to make a home-cooked meal for him. She does ask him, are you still having those episodes that you were suffering from? And Ted reveals that he's been seeing a therapist. It's been good for him. He asks his mom if she's ever thought about talking to somebody, but she says no, it's just not her thing. The next day, the team heads off for Manchester City. While still back in town, Nate is the head waiter at the Taste of Athens. But it's a job that Jade knows he's just way overqualified for. She tries to talk him into leaving Taste of Athens and going and taking the Richmond job. And he says that he is planning on getting back into coaching, but after the season. And it won't be going back to Richmond. That's the one place he can't go to. Deep down, he just doesn't want to face Ted. Later that night, though, the team has arrived in Manchester City. They're having a team bonding night by watching You've Got Mail. And Jamie's in the room, but he's not doing so hot. Especially after Keeley went to check on him, and she did more damage than good. She meant well, but she brought up his dad and how he might be cursing him out from the stands and what people are saying online, and it just backfired in her face. So once the movie ends and Jamie leaves, Keeley and Roy tail him. They want to make sure he's not going to do anything stupid. Although they don't do a really good job of being inconspicuous because he catches on to them. And he takes them to where he was heading. It wasn't his dad's house or a bridge to jump off of. It was actually his mom's. His mom is remarried to a really nice guy, and she's super proud of her son. It's clear that the relationship between Jamie and his mom is the exact opposite of his relationship with his dad. They make the group some food. Jamie chats with his mom. And eventually they get to the real reason of why Jamie showed up. It's not just to make a house call. He asks his mom if she's heard from his dad, and she says, no, I haven't heard from that guy in years. He tells his mom that he feels like he's got impotence, but in his soul, and he can't figure out how to shake it. His mom, trying to make her son feel better, says, Jamie, your father is who he is, and he's never, ever going to change. And like it or not, you've ended up being who you are so that you can prove him wrong. And you are amazing. She starts crying and says, Jamie, when you came on for the England team, I bawled my eyes out. And yeah, your dad'll be in the stands tomorrow, drunk, rooting against you, and it won't matter because you don't have anything to prove to that guy. It's not like the old Jamie Tart is back, but at least having the support of one of his parents means the world to him, and it's going to help Jamie move on. While Jamie was talking to his mom, Roy and Keeley got a tour of the house, which included Jamie's childhood home. Jamie's stepdad tells him that there were a lot of posters that came and went, but the one that always stayed on the wall was Roy Kent. The other poster, by the way, was of Keeley Jones, which is ironic because they later hooked up. But while they have some alone time, Roy tells Keeley, I don't want to be friends. Keeley really doesn't have a chance to respond because the door opens up and it's Jamie. He's in a much better mood than when they arrived, but he's ready to go. And the two head off, saying goodbye to Jamie's mom, and they have to get ready the next day because it's match day, and it's a big one. When Jamie enters the pitch, he's still a little bit of a shell of himself. He starts looking around the stands for his dad, but he doesn't see him. He doesn't really have time to look around too long, though, because the game has to start. And Jamie plays brilliantly. He not only leads to the first goal, but late in the game, when it's tied, Jamie Tart, on a bum ankle, ends up scoring a miraculous goal that puts it away for Richmond. It's also worth noting that Van Dam played out of his mind this game. Richmond will now enter the final week of the season with a chance to clinch the Premier League championship. But that might not be the most surprising thing that happened that day. The most surprising thing was when Jamie Tartt was taken out of the game because of that bum ankle, the Manchester City fans gave him a round of applause. Even though he's playing for another team and they booed him when he came out, he is one of their own. And while he's not in the stands, his dad was also watching that game. It looked like from a rehab center. And his dad had a smile ear to ear because he was also very proud of his son. After the game, Jamie actually reaches out to his dad, texting him for the first time in a while, saying, "Hey, it's been a while. I hope you're okay." When the team gets back to Richmond, they get ready to celebrate. Everybody except Jamie. He's got to get his ankle tended to. But he's not going to be alone. Roy and Keeley celebrate with him. Ted won't be celebrating, though. He has to head back to his apartment to go check on his mom. Before he leaves, though, he shows Beard a video clip of Nate tearing up the sign. Now, that's a clip that Beard has seen plenty of times. But what Beard hadn't seen was the aftermath. Nate went to go leave, but the team came back, so he hid under a desk for a couple hours. And then he went to go leave again, but the cleaning crew showed up, so he hid under that desk even longer. He finally left the facility at like 9 o'clock at night. Legs jelly. And he was locked in the room. He had to hop out of the window. Ted kind of chuckles to himself and says, I don't know about you, coach, but I hope that either all of us or none of us are judged by the actions of our weakest moments, but rather the strength we show when and if we're given a second chance. And that really hits home for Beard. Because when Beard and Ted met, it was in college. They were both backup special teamers. They never got in the field. Ted went into coaching, Beard went into prison. And when he got out, nobody wanted anything to do with him, so he looked up Ted. And Ted gave him a place to stay, he fed him, and how did Beard repay him? He stole his car. And Beard would have went back to prison if it wasn't for Ted telling the cop that he actually gave Beard the car. What Ted did in that moment was give Beard a second chance. Later on, he would give Beard a job and ultimately a life that he could be proud of. So even though Beard is mad at Nate, through this lesson, he realizes that he has to forgive him. Beard heads over to Nate's apartment where Nate has already decided he has to go back to Richmond. It didn't help that he got fired from A Taste of Athens. Jade absolutely had something to do with that. But when there's a knock at the door, Nate was actually writing Ted a 16-page apology note. Nate gets up, he opens the door, and he's terrified when he sees Beard. But Beard explains his whole backstory, and he offers Nate a chance to come back. And Nate offers Beard a chance to punch him in the face, but he doesn't do that. He just hugs him. Before he leaves, he tells him to show up tomorrow at 10 a.m. That was a difficult discussion for Beard to have, and Ted also had to have a difficult discussion, but it was with his mom. He asked her, all right, what's wrong? Why are you here? She plays dumb, saying that she just wanted to spend some time in London with her son, but Ted knows that that's not the case. So he says, well, thank you for cooking dinner, but F you for not wanting to talk. It catches his mom off guard, but Ted gets it all out. He starts complimenting her while then following it up with an F you. Thank you for all those small, silly little things that you did for me as a kid that would make me laugh. And F you for not working on yourself. It gets his mom to apologize, and she admits that she just didn't know what to do after Ted lost his dad. She tried to cope with it by just ignoring it. And through therapy, Ted's realized that he followed his mother's lead. And that's led to him bottling it up for all these years, which hasn't been good for him. His mother then says, you're right, Ted, I do have something to say to you. Your son misses you. That is really difficult for Ted to hear because he knows. He starts crying and he tells his mom, I miss him too. It's just like I'm scared sometimes to get close to that little boy because I know he's going to leave. His mom walks over, gives him a hug, and tells him that being a parent isn't all about the wins. Sometimes you do win, but most of the time you just tie. When he wakes up the next day, his mother has left for the airport, but she did leave him sunflower seed bread, so there's that. He heads into the office where he meets with Rebecca. Rebecca, by the way, the night before had a very interesting night. She got a knock at the door, and it was Bex. But it wasn't just Bex. It was Bex and Rupert's old assistant together. They wanted Rebecca's advice. On what, we don't know exactly, but you can figure out that it probably had to do with what to do with Rupert. Fast forward 12 hours later, and Rebecca isn't at her house listening to her ex-husband's lovers. She's at the office looking at Ted because this is normally the point of the season where she reveals something to him. Although this year she's got nothing. But Ted has something. And that will have to wait until next week. Ugh, the drama. And in the series finale, as you probably guessed by now, the big announcement that Ted had for Rebecca was, this is it. It's his final season. And because of that, Rebecca doesn't even want to talk about it. She doesn't want to think about the club without Ted. So it's going to take her a few days to come around and discuss it with him. It's not like she's mad. She completely understands why he wants to go home. In fact, the whole team does. They just don't want to see him go. That's how popular Ted is. But they do actually have a game to get ready for, and it's a really important game. They're playing West Ham, which is a obviously heated rivalry, but also this could be for the championship. Right now, they're 1 point behind Man City, and if Richmond win and Man City lose or draw, then Richmond is the champion of the league. It's also a bit of a revenge game for a few people. Nate the Great is back, albeit not in an assistant coach role. He's back as the assistant equipment manager. He's actually behind Will. It's also a revenge game for George, the coach that was fired by Rebecca in favor of Ted Lasso. He was hired by Rupert to be West Ham's new coach. And speaking of Rupert, his name is in hot water. Bex has filed for divorce, and his former assistant has filed charges on sexual harassment in the workplace. Plain and simple, Rupert needs this win in order to stay in the Champions League and kind of brush this scandal under the rug. So really, it's a big game for both teams. Everybody arrives at the pitch that day for practice. Trent Krim is excited because he's finally finished his book and he wants Ted and Beer to take a look at it. But up in Rebecca's office, Higgins has arrived with a list of potential candidates to replace Ted. She tells Leslie she's not ready to discuss that maybe after the season. And he's got some exciting news for her, though, that's not Ted-related. The fact that the club has done so well this season means that people are interested in buying the club, at least buying a share. He tells her that she could sell 49%, retain full control, and make a boatload of cash. And with that money, they could make some renovations, buy some new players, the works. And it's an enticing offer, but Rebecca says, what could I possibly get if I sell the entire club? And he tells her $2 billion, which is something she wasn't expecting. But the reason why she's thinking about selling the club is because she wanted this club to ruin Rupert's life, and he's doing a pretty good job of that on his own. She no longer really cares about Rupert, so she doesn't really have a need to keep the club. She kind of would rather just travel the world and enjoy life. She kind of just threw that idea out there, but with $2 billion hanging on the line, she needs to talk to somebody about it, so she goes out to lunch with her mother. As she's discussing this and her mother is imploring her to sell the team, get rid of it, a couple of the supporters come up and they paid for her meal. They did it because they really appreciate what Rebecca has done for the club, but mainly for the town and for them as fans and supporters. They appreciate how much Rebecca cares for the team, and it gives Rebecca a little bit of pause on the whole selling the team thing. But she decides to try to use this offer to sway Ted on his decision. After practice, she gets a one-on-one with him, and she begs him to stay, telling him that if he goes, she goes. She'll sell the club. But if he stays, she'll sell the 49%, and she'll make him the highest-paid coach in the league. She thinks that maybe this kind of offer would be one that Ted would have to go home, sleep on, come back the next day and talk about, but she can tell by his face he's already made up his mind. There's just no amount of money that's going to make it worth staying away from Henry. And he's not about to move Henry and Michelle out to London. As Ted goes to leave the pitch that night, he's walking by the locker room and he notices that Nate is just staring at the wall. He walks in the room and he sees that Nate is staring at where the believe sign used to be. It's a little bit awkward for both of them, but finally Nate starts to apologize and Ted tries to stop him, telling him it's fine, but Nate says, no, I have to do this. And he just cries into Ted's arms, apologizing for everything he did. He feels really, really bad about it. Ted, trying to make him feel better, says, hey, you tore that sign up once. I tore it up twice. It does diffuse any tension in the room. But Ted turns to the wall and says, when I look up there, I still see it. Nate and Ted, though, weren't the only enemies turned friends that had an awkward conversation that night. Earlier in the day, Jamie got approached by Nike to do a photo shoot, and he needed a PR rep. He thought Keely would be perfect. So he pulled her out in the hallway, he had a conversation with her, but that conversation was seen by Roy. Roy, trying to rekindle his relationship with Keely, invited Jamie out for a beer to tell him he's proud of him, but then nicely explain that him and Keely are on the road to recovery, so you might want to back off. But Jamie, finding out that the couple aren't official yet, told Roy, I ain't backing off. And this resulted in a fistfight between the two, where they finally realized, what are we doing? We're not Neanderthals. We should just go have her decide. How nice of them. And that's exactly how Keely took it. Oh, wow. That's really nice of you to let me decide who I'm going to be with. She kicked both their asses out to the street. It's probably for the best because the next day is the big match day. Everybody who's anybody is there, or at least they're watching. Like Dr. Sharon, she's watching. But so are Michelle and Henry. They're watching, and they're extremely invested in the game. But stupid Jake Jacobson, or whatever the hell his name is, he's also watching with them, but he's just belittling soccer the whole time, saying how boring it is and whatnot. For a therapist, the dude just cannot read the room. His Yelp reviews must suck. Back over in the locker room, all the coaches are meeting. Nate walks in to wish everybody luck, and then Roy comes in, and he shocks the entire room when he asks if he can be a member of the Diamond Dogs. And the reason why is because he wants to know if they think it's possible people can change. And it's kind of split, but yeah, for the most part, people do think that it's possible to change. As the coaches are discussing change, Will runs into the locker room because they got a package from Zava. He wants to wish the guys luck, but he's also sent them the biggest avocado you've ever seen. This thing is the size of a small child, like a toddler. This isn't the only reconciliation that goes on in the locker room, though. Danny Rojas does feel bad about breaking Van Damme's face, so he gives him a badass-looking black carbon fiber face mask. Ted then walks in because he asked Coach Beard to make the guys a video. It really just goes through all the highlights of the AFC Richmond team under Ted Lasso. The good times and the fun times. No bad times here. But even though it probably was supposed to be a feel-good moment, it's an emotional moment. And when the guys head out to the pitch, they're not really fired up. They're crying. Maybe it affects them because they enter the half down 2-0. And to make things worse, Man City is up 1-0 in their match. Ted enters the room at the half, but he starts off the halftime speech not about the game, but about thanking the guys, telling them what an honor it was to coach each and every one of them. He truly appreciates them. As for the game, he doesn't know what's going to happen, but he does know one of the beauties about sports is nobody knows what's going to happen. At one point in this speech, he does turn to where the belief sign used to be, but then he remembers it's not there anymore, and he kind of just pivots. But just because the belief sign isn't there doesn't mean it's not in the room. It starts with Sam, who's been keeping a piece of the belief sign in his locker. He stands up and throws it down. That's followed by Jamie, who's been keeping some of the belief sign in his locker. And one by one, all of the players start pulling out the bits of the torn up belief sign. They throw it down on the table, and then they start trying to reconstruct it because, after all, it was torn up. This really motivates the club because they come out playing like their hair's on fire. Doesn't take too long for Jamie Tart to score and make the game a 2-1 contest. Shortly after that, they get a penalty kick. Normally, Jamie or Danny would take it, but they elect Isaac to take it, which is bold because he doesn't take penalty kicks. But it ends up working out. Isaac hits it so hard, he hits it through the damn net. The game is now tied 2-2. Because of this, they need to fix the net. And at this point, Rupert is fed up. His team just blew a 2-goal lead, and he's dangerously close to losing his second Premier League club. So he storms down to the field and demands George take out Jamie Tart. Injure him. And Coach George tells him, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to play that kind of game. The two get into a heated argument that ends when Rupert pushes George down, and everybody sees it. It's a really bad look for Rupert, and as he's leaving the pitch, he's serenaded by the fans with the word wanker, which is not an endearing phrase. Doesn't get any better for Rupert, because as the game is tied 2-2 in the 90th minute, Richmond has one final play that could win it. The coaches all huddle up, they start discussing what play they're going to run, and Ted decides they're going to run Nate's play. It works. With just about no time remaining on the clock, Sam threads it through and scores to win the game for Richmond and put them in contention to win the championship. Everybody piles onto the pitch and they start celebrating. It looks like Richmond is going to win this damn thing. Unfortunately, it wasn't meant to be. Man City ended up winning their game and thus winning the Premier League championship. Richmond finished second. As for Rupert, he lost his club. But Rebecca decided to keep hers. She sold 49% of it, though, but it was to the fans. She ended up meeting Ted at the airport to wish him goodbye. She's really going to miss him. As she's leaving, though, she watches a little girl fall to the ground, and when she goes to check on her, her dad is running up to them. But it turns out her dad is that dude from Amsterdam. They finally get a formal greeting, and it looks like they can possibly rekindle the magic they had on that boat. As for Ted, him and Beard are on the plane, but Beard decides, I can't do this. He explains to Ted that he wants to stay. He wants to go, run off the plane, and marry Jade. Ted is very supportive of this, but unfortunately the doors have locked, so Beard has to fake a burst appendix. Eventually, he and Jade do end up getting married. Trent Crimm's book does come out, and it's a big success. There was one tiny thing that Ted suggested he change. Originally, the book was called The Lasso Effect, but Ted said, it's not about me. It never was. So instead, Trent decides to rename it The Richmond Way. As for some of the players, Sam Abasanya will be finally living his dream and playing for the Nigerian national team. Jamie rekindled his relationship with his dad, and it seems like things are going to go real well for them. Both of those guys are going to be coached by Richmond's new coach, actually their old coach, Roy Kent. He was officially named the manager of the club. But they did welcome back somebody else, Dr. Sharon, and Roy has taken up therapy with her. They also decided to bring back that belief sign. Beard, Nate, Roy, they just figured it was right. They'll also have to make room at the pitch because Keeley has proposed a women's team for AFC Richmond, and that's something that Rebecca is a big fan of. So that's going to happen next year. And as for Ted, he went home to Kansas City and was welcomed back like a king by Henry. And he was perfectly content, no longer coaching in the Premier League, but coaching Henry's soccer team. And while there's no finale on his relationship with Michelle, Dr. Jacobson's nowhere to be found, so that's good. He can kick rocks. And that is the end of Ted Lasso. Thank you so much for getting this part of the recap. I really appreciate it. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Hit thumbs up if you liked it. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought this sucked. Be nice in the comments section. If I mess something up, hey, it happens. Just hit thumbs down. Keep it moving. I have merch. I have a Patreon. I have a bunch of ways you can give me money. Or you could just let the ads run. That works too. And let me know in the comments if you think this will be the final season. Once again, though, thank you for watching.